Hey everyone, welcome back to Paranormal M. I hope you're doing well tonight. Before we start, if you have any unexplained paranormal experiences of your own, feel free to send them to me. And if you enjoy the stories in this video, please give it a like. Tonight's first story is more like advice for someone who wants to have a real paranormal experience. It talks about going in with the right mindset, not rushing into anything, and treating the place with respect. So relax, get comfortable, and let's get into the stories. I hope you sleep well tonight. Honestly, the fact that you're even willing to open your mind and put real effort into having a genuine experience is already a strong first step. But I'll say this right away, and I mean it kindly. Stay grounded. Wanting an experience is fine, but don't walk into it wanting to believe every little sound is something supernatural. Do your due diligence. Try to debunk things. Check for drafts, old pipes, animals, loose boards, anything ordinary first. That way, if something does happen, you won't be left wondering whether you fooled yourself. If you're just starting out, I really think the best thing you can do is go with someone you trust. Maybe a close friend, a sibling, someone steady. That way, you can talk things through together, compare what each of you felt or heard, and keep each other balanced. I'd also suggest looking for local places near you that host public paranormal investigations. A lot of these are led by people who know the building's history well, and they usually know the active spots too. It's also much cheaper than trying to rent out a whole location by yourself. There are websites with maps and lists of haunted places in different areas. Some are official tours or public investigations, and others are just local legends where people have reported strange activity. The one thing I would not do is jump straight into some ritual or seance. That is not where you start. You don't know exactly what you're doing yet, and more importantly, you may not know how to protect yourself. I've been investigating the paranormal for around 12 years, and even now, I wouldn't sit down and do a seance alone. And that's with experience. When you go into a place, clear your mind and focus on your intentions. In your case, it sounds like your intention is to communicate or possibly have some kind of experience because you have real questions about what happens after death. To me, that's a sincere reason. You're not just barging in demanding proof. You're coming in with curiosity, respect, and a genuine question. And I'll tell you now, if you do get a response, it probably won't answer everything. It'll likely make you ask even more questions. That's just how this field works. I don't think anyone can know everything about the paranormal. Part of me even believes we're not meant to know all of it. Also, don't be discouraged if you spend 6 or 8 hours somewhere and nothing happens. There are no guarantees. Spirits aren't performers waiting in the dark to put on a show for the living. If they feel comfortable with you, or if there's some kind of connection, they may choose to make themselves known. But it has to be on their terms too. Wherever you go, keep a positive mindset. Be polite. Be respectful. You'd be surprised how much simple things like saying please and thank you can change the feeling in a place. When I first started, I found a few local locations within about an hour of where I lived, and I went with my cousin Mara. We did that a handful of times, and little by little, we started meeting location owners and other people in the paranormal field. Eventually, we made friends and found a team to investigate with. Now, honestly, they feel like a second family to me. I'm incredibly grateful for what this path has brought into my life, and that's not even counting the experiences themselves. Some of them have stayed with me in a way I can't fully explain. A lot of location owners are wonderful people. They usually love the buildings they care for, and many of them are happy to sit and talk with you about the history. Some might even offer times when you can come back for a quieter, more private experience. I volunteered at a couple of places, just helping clean, move boxes, sweep floors, that kind of thing. And funny enough, I've had experiences during the day when I wasn't even trying. I think maybe the spirits just got used to me being there and decided to say hello. One more important thing. Set your boundaries clearly before and after every investigation. Introduce yourself. Say why you're there. Let them know what you are and are not comfortable with. For example, if you don't want to be touched, say that firmly. If you're okay with communication but not physical contact, say that too. And when you're finished, thank them. Then make it clear that nothing is allowed to follow you home. Whatever is there needs to stay there. I really hope something in this helps you as you start your own journey. Go slowly. Stay respectful. Keep your feet on the ground, even when your mind is reaching into the unknown. I have two stories, and I still think about both of them more often than I probably admit out loud. The first one is about my ex-husband, whose name was Caleb. His father was never really in the picture, so he was mostly raised by his mother and by his grandfather, Franklin. And Franklin was not just some distant grandparent who showed up on holidays. He was Caleb's father figure in every way that mattered. If anyone had asked Caleb who had helped raise him, he would have said Franklin without even thinking twice. Franklin was one of those old school men from a quiet little town in Vermont. The kind of man who walked everywhere, knew everybody, and had probably waved at half the town before breakfast. Back when he was younger, he had served with the local fire department, and people really respected him. He was steady, familiar, a part of the town's bones, really. At the time, Caleb and I were living in the upstairs apartment of a 2-story duplex. Some close friends of ours lived downstairs. That detail matters because the smoke detectors in the building were hardwired, so if one apartment's alarms went off, both apartments usually heard it. We had never had any real problems with them before, except the occasional burnt toast situation or someone getting ambitious with dinner. About a year after Caleb and I got married, Franklin passed away. The morning of his wake, around 3 a.m, Caleb and I were jolted awake by the fire alarms going off. We barely had enough time to sit up, look around the room, and try to understand what was happening before the alarms suddenly stopped. At first, we figured our downstairs neighbors had probably burned something. That was not exactly unheard of. So we laid back down and tried to go back to sleep. Then, maybe 5 minutes later, the alarms went off again. This time, we got up. We checked the apartment. We looked for smoke. We checked on the cat too, because if it had been carbon monoxide, I knew smaller animals could show signs before people did. Everything seemed fine. I went down the stairs and listened near our neighbor's door to see if their alarms were going off too. They weren't. That was strange. Really strange. Then, just like before, the alarms stopped on their own. We cracked a window just to be safe, went back upstairs, and got into bed again. Still uneasy, but tired enough to hope it was over. 5 minutes later, the alarms started screaming again. And I don't know what came over me, but I sat up and shouted, "Enough, Franklin!" The alarms stopped immediately. Not faded, not slowed down. Stopped. We lived in that apartment for another few years after that, and those smoke alarms never went off like that again. Caleb and I always liked to believe that was Franklin saying goodbye in the only way that made sense for him. A fireman, one last time, making sure we knew he was there. The second story happened after Caleb and I decided to divorce. Not long after that, I signed up for an EMT course that my sister was teaching. My sister is one of those people everybody loves, and I don't say that bitterly at all, because I adore her too. She joined the military at 16 with our parents' permission, served in Iraq, and even received a governor's award for work she did helping civilians get access to medical care. After she came home, she became an EMT, then worked her way up to critical care paramedic, which is basically a doctor on wheels without the operating room. Eventually, she was asked to take over as chief of a small-town rescue squad that was close to shutting down. A few years later, they were thriving. And somehow, through all of that, she was raising 2 kids and finishing nursing school with high honors. So yes, everyone's favorite. She needed more people to fill the EMT class, and I needed another source of income because I was suddenly trying to manage life as a single mom on one income. I had no real medical background, aside from a CPR class back in middle school. My sister was the medical person in our family. My dad had some basic first responder knowledge, but that was about it. And my dad is important to this story too. He and I were not close. I spent years in foster care, and for a long stretch of that, we had no contact at all. Later on, he actually lived with Caleb and me for a while, which became one of the reasons my marriage started to fall apart. My dad was not easy to live with. He smoked constantly, rarely showered, and used that old classic Old Spice to try to cover everything up. Eventually, we got him into senior housing, but while he lived with us, it caused damage in my marriage that we just never really repaired. So while I was taking this EMT class, I was juggling a full-time job, an hour commute each way, single motherhood, and a brain that felt like it was running on candlelight. I paid attention during class, but I fell behind on the textbook reading. I could understand the material when it was taught to me, but tests were a whole different beast. I've always had anxiety around exams, and the NREMT certification exam felt terrifying. Very official, very strict, very much like walking into a room where the pencils have authority. Then, in August of that year, my dad died. It hit me harder than I expected. Grief is strange that way. Even when the relationship is complicated, the loss still lands. I had trouble focusing on work, on the EMT class, on everything. I did manage to pass the class, and I passed the practical exam where you have to show that you know how to handle emergency scenarios. But the written NREMT exam was still waiting for me, and I kept putting it off. I was convinced I would fail. I hadn't read enough. My head was foggy, and worst of all, I thought failing would embarrass my sister after everything she had done to help me. So I delayed it. And delayed it. Finally, in November, my sister told me I needed to take the test. Everything about that day felt like a warning not to go. It was late November in Vermont, cold and snowy, and I had to drive about 2 hours to a licensed testing center. You had to show ID. You couldn't bring anything in with you. You were recorded the whole time, and you absolutely could not be late. About an hour into the drive, I hit a road closure because of an accident. My anxiety spiked instantly. I turned around and took a dirt back road, but it had snowed the night before, and I was rushing. I was driving too fast for the conditions, and I didn't know the road well. I took one corner way too quickly and nearly lost control of the Jeep. Somehow, I corrected it. After that, I slowed down and drove like someone who had finally received the message. I made it to the testing center on time, but barely. The test was awful. With that exam, if it shuts off around 60 questions, you either did extremely well or extremely badly. If it drags on close to 150 questions, that usually means you struggled. Mine stopped around 120, which told me absolutely nothing. So I walked out with no idea whether I had passed or failed. Then I had to drive 2 hours home through the cold, carrying that uncertainty like a stone in my chest. The windows were rolled up. The radio was low. I was completely lost in my own thoughts, already imagining how I was going to tell my sister I had failed. And then it hit me. Cigarette smoke. Body odor. and that unmistakable old school Old Spice. It was my dad. There was no doubt in my mind. No other explanation made sense. The smell was too specific, too familiar, too him, and somehow I knew he was there with me. About 2 hours after I got home, I found out I had passed my NREMT exam. I've been a certified EMT for 4 years now. I went on to help my sister rebuild that rescue squad into something incredible, and not long ago, it was named Vermont Ambulance Service of the Year. I still think that smell in the car was my dad coming back for just a moment. Maybe to tell me I had done well. Maybe to tell me he was proud. And honestly, after everything, I really needed that. I'll be honest with you. If you're hoping everything in this universe is going to line up perfectly with reason and logic, you may end up disappointed over and over again. After more than 5 decades of living, I've learned that not everything can be neatly explained. And honestly, I don't even wear myself out trying to make sense of most things anymore. For me personally, things actually make less sense without God. I'm not saying that to push my beliefs on anyone. I'm just speaking from where I stand. I have a hard time looking at the universe and believing it all just happened by accident. The idea that everything began with some massive explosion, and then somehow planets, stars, life, oceans, animals, and human beings all came together by chance just doesn't sit right with me. Especially when I think about the human body. Every second of every day, there are countless things happening inside us without us even telling them to happen. Our hearts beat, our lungs breathe, our cells repair, our brains process. Even when we're sick, the body keeps fighting, keeps adjusting, keeps trying to keep us alive. That feels far too intricate to be random, at least to me. So the closest I come to finding meaning and logic behind our existence is the belief in a divine creator. And then there are all the stories people have told throughout history. Stories about paranormal experiences, near-death experiences, ghosts, UFOs, cryptids, past life memories, and things that seem to reach beyond what we usually call normal. I'm not talking about people who are just making wild claims for attention. I'm talking about ordinary, credible people. People with families, jobs, reputations, and nothing obvious to gain by speaking up. A few weeks ago, I watched a video about researchers who took years' worth of reported cryptid sightings and ran the data through AI. I can't remember whether it focused only on Bigfoot or included other cryptids too, but I think it may have covered several kinds of sightings. The idea was to see if patterns appeared. Maybe the data would expose the whole thing as nonsense. Maybe it would show that most of the reports came from unreliable sources. But according to what I watched, that isn't what happened. The AI didn't come back and say, yes, Bigfoot is real, or anything that dramatic. But it did suggest that something unusual was going on. The reports weren't as random as people might expect. One of the strongest patterns had to do with the people reporting these encounters. They weren't mostly unstable or unreliable. In fact, many of them seemed to be respectable, everyday people from all kinds of backgrounds. Different races, different cultures, different religions, different walks of life. Another pattern had to do with timing and location. A lot of these encounters seemed to happen around twilight, either near sunrise or sunset. And many of them happened near water, like rivers, lakes, creeks, or wooded areas close to shorelines. That caught my attention. And when it comes to Bigfoot in particular, there are so many reports that describe something almost paranormal. People say they saw it clearly, then suddenly it was gone. Not just hidden behind a tree, but gone in a way that didn't feel natural. I've heard people describe it almost like the creature stepped out of reality for a moment. I sometimes think of it as hiding in plain sight, or hiding in the light. Maybe these beings, whatever they are, aren't fully part of our physical world. Maybe they can move in and out of whatever dimension we live in. Maybe they can even choose who sees them and who doesn't. That may sound strange, but honestly, it reminds me of UFO and alien encounters too. A lot of paranormal experiences share similar threads, but they still have enough personal detail to feel individual and real. And to me, it's hard to believe that millions of people across the world, across centuries, are all lying or all mistaken. Some people talk about leaving their bodies during near-death experiences. Some remember past lives with details that can later be checked. Some see ghosts. Some encounter strange creatures. Some experience UFOs or missing time. And then there are my own experiences. I've had a near-death experience myself, along with a few things connected to hauntings that I still can't explain away. So no, I don't believe everything in life fits neatly into a little box of logic. Some things don't. Some things seem to exist at the edge of what we understand. And after all these years, I've made peace with that. I want to tell you this as honestly as I can, because I've experienced a lot of what you're describing. Not always all at once, and not always in the same way, but enough that I understand that feeling of wondering whether something unseen is pressing into your life. Back then, I was pregnant and genuinely happy. My husband, Mark, was a good man, and we were excited about becoming parents. But the house we were living in needed too much work. It just didn't feel like the kind of place where we could bring a baby home and still manage everything else. So we moved. We found a pleasant-looking house in a town we'd lived in before when we were newly married. At first, everything seemed fine. But after about 2 months, I started feeling it. That strange sense that someone else was there. Sometimes it didn't even feel like one presence. It felt like a crowd of people I couldn't see. One afternoon, I was sitting in bed reading. My cat was curled up beside me, completely asleep. Suddenly, the side of the bed I was on lifted into the air, maybe 4 or 5 inches, and then dropped hard. My cat woke up from it immediately. That was the thing that stayed with me. I knew I hadn't imagined it. After that, I started seeing shadowy figures around the house. Not just inside either. I would see them around the neighborhood too. Around that same time, a young couple moved in next door. I knew the young woman's father a little, and he had been so pleased about his new son-in-law. He had known him for years and spoke very warmly about him. The couple seemed happy at first. Then the young woman became pregnant, and they were thrilled. But soon after, the fighting began. The husband started drinking heavily. After the baby was born, she moved out. From then on, the police were constantly at the house because of his drunken outbursts. Eventually, the place sat empty for a long while. On the other side of us, another young family moved in. Before long, there was constant domestic violence there too, bad enough that the police had to keep coming. Then there was a house a couple of doors down. When we first moved into the neighborhood, the owner had recently died from cancer. The house was empty for a while, and then a very nice family moved in. Not long after, the mother suddenly developed cancer and passed away. That family left. Another family moved in after them. They had a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, and I know this sounds awful to say, but there was something deeply wrong in his eyes. He had this coldness about him that frightened me. Nobody else seemed to notice it, but he seemed to know that I did. He was especially unpleasant toward me, though I was never rude or unkind to him. I just tried to keep my distance. One night, I was walking my dog when I saw a very tall shadow figure move toward that house. It didn't open a door. It just passed straight through the wall. The feeling coming from it was horrible. Not just dark, but full of hatred. It felt like it hated people. After that, the father in that house became verbally abusive to his wife in front of everyone. One day, the mother came over terrified and asked my husband for help. She said the ceiling fans in her house had turned on by themselves and were spinning so violently she thought they were going to tear out of the ceiling. My husband couldn't fix it, so the only thing he could do was shut off the electricity. Eventually, that family moved in the middle of the school year. They left furniture behind and only took clothes and small personal things. When the mother came to say goodbye, I noticed the little boy seemed different. He looked normal again, not cold or cruel like before. But he was physically very sick. I don't know everything that happened to them after that, but I heard they settled somewhere far away, on the other side of the country. I hope they found peace. Their children would probably be college age by now. My own daughter grew up seeing shadow figures in that house, and after years of being surrounded by so much violence and heaviness, we finally sold it. An Indian family bought it, and since we didn't move too far away, we've seen them from time to time. They seem very happy there, which honestly brings me some comfort. That's why I do believe blessings can help, in whatever way your culture or religion understands them. I have Indian friends, and one of them works very intentionally to keep her home peaceful and blessed. She is Hindu, very devoted, and active in her temple. I'm Christian, so I pray over my home. I've also used salt while praying. In that old house, I don't think I could keep the shadow beings away permanently, but I could create long stretches of peace. The house I live in now is much calmer. I don't see shadow figures here. Once in a while, it feels like something passes through, but it never stays. Still, there are strange things. The house itself is well built and well maintained, but things break in ways that don't make sense even to contractors. Strong materials that should have lasted have disintegrated. Appliances, small hardware, door mechanisms, things like that have just fallen apart from the inside. My husband was fairly well, and then about 3 years ago his health suddenly declined badly. He could have taken better care of himself, yes, but many people take worse care of themselves and don't become that sick so quickly. He passed away. I've also had pets who seemed perfectly fine suddenly die. 2 cats dropped dead unexpectedly, and another became ill very fast and died. Each time it was said to be heart failure. In the last 5 years, all of my husband's aunts and uncles, both of his parents, and my father have died. And it hasn't only been me. One friend's husband suddenly lost his sanity. He had seemed fine, and then something in him just snapped. We're still hoping he recovers. Another friend had a stable, comfortable life, and within 2 years lost his job, his health, and his home. I thought my luck had been bad, but what happened to him was catastrophic and so fast. Most people I know are struggling with something serious now, even people who seemed steady before. I do pray a Christian prayer that someone once shared online, but I won't repeat it here because I don't know your religion, and I want to be respectful. I also believe in science and logic. I really do. It's possible that some of what people experience comes from psychological strain, grief, stress, or exhaustion. I explored that seriously in my own life. After I reported seeing things, doctors treated it as hallucinations, and I was treated for postnatal depression and postnatal psychosis. I made sure to check whether I was mentally well. So I would say this gently. Always rule out ordinary causes first. Health, stress, sleep, environment, carbon monoxide, grief, trauma, anything that could explain what's happening. Start there. And only after that, if things still don't make sense, then consider the possibility that something else may be going on. Everything I've told you could be explained away as people collapsing under the strain of modern life. Maybe that's all it was. But I lived through it. And I know how it felt. There was one rainy night that Lyra never forgot. She had gone back to her family's old vacation house in the province, a place no one had really stayed in for years, not since her grandmother passed away almost 6 years earlier. The house still stood there, quiet and stiff, but it felt less like a home and more like something that had been holding its breath. Lyra carried her bags up to the second floor and chose the room that used to belong to her grandmother. It was clean, but the air inside felt heavy. Old photographs covered the walls, mostly pictures of stars, moons, and planets. Her grandmother had always loved the sky. Across the room was a wide window facing the dark clouds outside. As Lyra unpacked, she let out a tired breath. "Why did I have to stay in this room?" she whispered to herself. After she finished arranging her things, she lay down on the bed. Rain hammered against the roof, steady and restless. The wind slipped through the cracks of the old house, making soft, hollow sounds that almost felt like breathing. Then, without warning, the power went out. Lyra froze. She stayed still in the darkness, telling herself it was nothing. Just the rain, just the storm, just an old house making old house noises. Then something flickered near the window. At first she thought it might have been a light from outside, maybe a passing vehicle, maybe a lamp from the road. But there was no road close enough to that side of the house. The flicker came again. This time she saw it clearly. A small hand appeared at the edge of the window. It was pale, too pale. The fingers were thin and wet, pressing gently against the glass. Lyra sat up slowly, her heart beating hard in her chest. Then another hand appeared, then another. One by one, more pale hands slid over the window, brushing the glass as if they were searching for a way in. Lyra wanted to scream, but her voice stayed trapped in her throat. She knew that room was on the second floor. There was no balcony outside, no ledge wide enough for anyone to stand on, no ladder, no tree, nothing. And yet the hands were there. Then the window opened by itself. A cold gust of air rushed into the room, carrying the smell of rain, wet leaves, and something old. Something buried. Then a soft voice whispered from outside. "I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you, my child." Lyra turned toward the window, and there, hanging in the darkness outside, was her grandmother's face. But it was not the face Lyra remembered. The eyes were empty, dull, and clouded. The mouth stretched into a slow, heavy smile. Her hands reached forward like tangled roots, desperate to hold on to something. "Grandma?" Lyra cried. She jumped from the bed and ran toward the door, but before she could reach it, something grabbed her ankle. A hand, cold, wet, tight. It felt soaked with rain and tears. Lyra fell hard to the floor. She kicked and clawed at the wooden boards, but the hand dragged her backward, inch by inch, toward the open window. The voice came again, closer now. "You can't leave. You promised you would stay with me." Lyra screamed. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The hands vanished. The face disappeared. The lights came back on. The window was shut, locked, and still, as if nothing had happened. But near the window, on the wooden floor, were small handprints. Wet, pale handprints. No matter how hard Lyra scrubbed them, they would not fade. The next morning she packed her things and said she was leaving right away. She did not explain much. She just wanted out of that house. But as she walked down the path toward the gate, something made her look back. Upstairs, in her grandmother's old room, she saw a face pressed against the window. It was her own, smiling, hanging outside the glass, with both hands pressed flat against it. I think I understand what you mean. In a way, I feel like I've had similar experiences, though maybe you're a little more sensitive to it than I am. The first thing I remember happened when I was very young, probably around 3 years old. My older sister, Eliza, and I shared a room, and we had bunk beds. She slept on the top bunk, and I slept on the bottom one. One night, something woke me up. I don't remember hearing a crash or anything like that. I just remember suddenly being awake and standing beside my bed. Then I heard a whisper. It was close, but I couldn't see anyone. It kept saying, "Go, go, go, go." Somehow I knew exactly what it meant. I knew I was supposed to leave the room and go to my parents' bedroom. So I did. I climbed into bed beside my dad, who was still asleep, and curled up next to him. Only a few minutes later, there was this horrible noise from our room. My sister's top bunk had collapsed down onto my bed, right where I had been sleeping. My parents and I ran in, and there was Eliza sitting up in the broken bunk, crying her little heart out. Thankfully, she wasn't hurt. She was just terrified. I remember talking with her about it when we were kids, but now, all these years later, she doesn't remember it at all. I do, though. I remember it very clearly. Since then, I've had plenty of other experiences. Some were just that strange inner knowing that something was about to happen. Other times, I've seen figures or felt presences. I also had repeated encounters with spirits in a house I lived in years ago with my former husband. As for why it happens to you, I honestly think sometimes it runs in families. I don't know anyone in my extended family who openly talks about having experiences like mine, but a lot of relatives on my mother's side were deeply religious. So it's possible some of them did experience things and just kept quiet about it because of what they were taught to believe. And sometimes, I think it simply happens. No neat explanation, no tidy little box to put it in. When you get that creepy feeling, I think it's best to leave if you can, and not give whatever it is too much attention. Sometimes ignoring it seems to help, almost like it assumes you don't notice it and moves on. But once it knows that you know it's there, I'd be firm. You can say it out loud or just say it in your mind, but say it with authority. Tell it to leave you alone. Act like you're in charge of your own space, because you are. I've had moments where I basically told something to get away from me and stop bothering me, and it worked. You can also ask for help from loved ones who have passed, or from whatever guides or protective spirits you believe in. They may be able to help, or maybe not, but I don't think it hurts to ask. Some people also wear black tourmaline for protection, others like rose quartz. You don't have to make a big ritual out of it. You could just keep a stone in your pocket if that feels right to you. Most of the time, spirits don't really bother me. They're just there, passing through in their own way. But when the energy feels wrong, heavy, or threatening, that's when I call for help or make it very clear that I want to be left alone. If you belong to a religion, lean on what brings you comfort there. For some people, that might mean praying to Jesus. For others, it might mean calling on Allah, angels, ancestors, saints, or whatever spiritual protection they trust. In my opinion, the exact words don't matter as much as your intention. If you're too scared to remember a prayer, just focus on the feeling of protection. Push that intention outward. Make it clear that whatever is bothering you is not welcome. I hope this helps you a little. Trust your intuition. Pay attention to how something feels. Some things can be deceptive, so learning discernment takes time and, honestly, a bit of trial and error. Take the advice that feels right to you and leave the rest behind. You'll figure out what works for you. Good luck. I can understand why all of this might leave you feeling shaken. Honestly, I wasn't sure I should step into this conversation at first, mostly because I try to be careful about what energies I open myself up to. But my son, Eli, encouraged me to answer you, so I'm going to try. I'll keep it as brief as I can, though I'll admit right away that I do have a habit of wandering down the long road when a short path would do. First, you asked why these things might be happening to you, especially when you see yourself as an ordinary person. From what I'm picking up, this seems to come through your mother's side of the family. It may have skipped a generation, maybe even two, or maybe the people before you simply chose not to talk about it. Sometimes these things frighten people so much that they would rather pretend nothing is there at all. And please don't underestimate yourself. Some of the most unusual gifts show up in people who think they're completely ordinary. A deeply intuitive person may think everyone senses what they sense. A compassionate person may think their kindness is just common sense. You're still young, and young people, especially children and teens, can be more open, more sensitive, and sometimes more easily influenced by what's around them. There is a chance you may grow out of it as you get older. But if you don't, then I suppose I should say, welcome to the strange little club that can feel both cursed and blessed. A lot of it has to do with sensitivity, awareness, and even the way certain parts of your mind are still developing. You also asked whether you should acknowledge them when something frightening happens, or ignore them completely. My advice is to ignore them as much as you possibly can. Do not feed it with attention. Do not let it pull you into a conversation. And if you can, I would suggest finding someone experienced and grounded, perhaps a reputable spiritual advisor or medium in your area, someone who knows how to handle these things safely. My son just said he has a strong feeling you may have been thinking about using a Ouija board or something similar. Please, do not do that. I cannot stress this enough. Do not invite anything in. Do not open the door wider than it already is. Even if you think they might leave you alone afterward, they almost certainly won't. That sort of thing rarely closes the door. More often, it removes the hinges. You asked about the veil, and that can be a difficult thing to explain. The veil is the divide between realities. In this case, it is the separation between the physical world we live in and what people often call the beyond. I don't believe it is somewhere far away. It is more like the same world, but viewed from another layer of it. Those beings, spirits, entities, whatever word you prefer, are not bound by physical rules in the same way we are. Time, space, and distance do not seem to hold them the way they hold us. Imagine a thin curtain over a window. You can see movement and shapes behind it, but not clearly. That is the closest way I can describe it. And because it is not a physical thing, people experience it differently. Some sense it visually, some emotionally, some through dreams, sounds, or sudden knowing. As for protection, yes, there are things you can try. You might visit a spiritual shop and ask about protective crystals. I've heard good things from people who use them. Black tourmaline is often used for protection against heavier or negative energy. My son feels that for you, it may not be enough on its own. He mentioned amethyst, and then purple chalcedony came to him as well. I want to be clear that we are not crystal experts, but we are interested in them, and those are the ones that came forward while thinking about your situation. You also asked how to know whether something means harm or not. The simplest answer is this: trust your gut. Truly, your body often knows before your mind catches up. If something feels wrong, heavy, cold, invasive, or like it is trying to push you into doing something, listen to that feeling. Do not accept anything from it. Do not make deals. Do not agree to anything. And if ignoring it is no longer possible, speak clearly and firmly. You can say, "You are not welcome here. You need to leave." Use a calm, commanding voice. Do not plead. Do not bargain. Set the boundary like you mean it. As for how these things can hurt someone, there are different ways. Some harm is emotional or mental. They may stir up painful memories, create fear, or make you feel isolated so you become easier to influence. Physical harm is less common, but it can happen. My son and I have both experienced things we could not easily explain. He has been scratched, grabbed, and even bitten, and I witnessed some of it myself. They can sometimes pull a person into a strange, trance-like state. They can make your thoughts feel cloudy or push old wounds to the surface. But I want you to remember that something has to be unusually strong to do that kind of thing. It is not something I want you lying awake every night expecting. Be cautious, yes, but do not let fear become the house you live in. I know this old lady has gone on longer than intended, but I hope some of this brings you a little clarity. Blessings to you, and please take care of yourself. One more thing before I go. My son mentioned a song to the tune of "You Are My Sunshine," but with different words. Does that mean anything to you? It may be connected to someone else, but I get the feeling it has something to do with your mother or your family. He says it feels like the second verse, the part about crying, was changed when your mother was younger because that part made her uncomfortable. I don't have a huge amount of experience with things like this, but I can tell you what happened to us. It started in the house we later came to call the Hat Man house. One night, my husband saw him standing over our baby's crib, a tall, dark shape with that unmistakable hat. And instead of freezing or pretending he hadn't seen anything, my husband spoke to him. He told him to leave our child alone. Before that night, there had been this awful weight over the whole house. It felt like the air itself had teeth. I had seen the Hat Man before, and honestly, I thought I was losing my mind. My husband and I had been cold with each other for months, arguing over everything. A lot of it came from him thinking I was imagining things, or exaggerating, or falling apart somehow. But the night he saw him too, something shifted. We started paying closer attention to ourselves. When we felt that sudden irritation rising, when one of us was about to snap over nothing, we would stop. We would call a timeout, go outside, and talk. Not argue, talk. We'd ask, where is this really coming from? And is this actually us? And the more directly we communicated, the less it felt like something in that house could pull our strings. After we finally moved out, the older kids began telling us what they had been dealing with. Footsteps when no one was walking, voices, windows opening and closing by themselves. Things they had kept quiet about for years. They hated that house, every single moment of the 3 years we lived there. From the outside, it looked perfectly normal, a nice home in a good neighborhood. The kind of place people would drive by and think, what a lovely family house. But inside, none of us felt safe. Even now, that house still shows up in our darker dreams. Even for my youngest, who was only 2 when we moved. He's 21 now, and somehow that place still found a way to stay with him. It wasn't until later that I learned about saging a home, and about walking through your space with confidence, speaking out loud, firmly banning anything dark or harmful from staying there. You have to mean it. You have to be direct, firm, loud if you need to be. No fear in your voice. It's your home, and you revoke any claim anything hidden thinks it has on being there. I've done that in every place I've lived since the Hat Man house. I would love to say it would have worked there too, but I honestly don't know. What I do know is that every home after I learned about saging and banishing has been free of that kind of darkness. Now, we do have what I jokingly call house gnomes. You know, the little harmless kind of weirdness where a remote disappears, and then later it's sitting right back in the exact place everyone already checked 3 times. That sort of thing. Annoying, yes. Sinister, no. But before I learned about cleansing and banishing, we lived in one more strange house. It was the place we moved into right after the Hat Man house. That one was a short-term rental while we were looking for something permanent. And from the beginning, I felt watched. There was only one corner in the master bathroom that felt truly private. I can't explain why, but the rest of the house felt like it was listening. There was this pressure to be quiet. And I had 4 boys under 12, so quiet was not exactly their natural habitat. But even they tiptoed around in that house. They moved like one loud noise might crack the ceiling open above us. Later, the older kids told me they saw a man walking down the hallway every night. At the time, I remember them all deciding to sleep together in one bedroom and use the other rooms for forts. I was uneasy enough myself that I was relieved they picked the bedroom right across the hall from mine. We were there less than a month. That was when I really started searching for ways to make the supernatural stuff stop. And strangely enough, once I learned about Sage, the landlord suddenly told us we had to leave because the house had sold. At almost the same time, a house became available in the exact neighborhood we had been hoping for. It was only a couple miles away, and the move could happen quickly. I didn't take any chances. The first day I brought boxes over, I saged every corner of that new house. Every cabinet, every closet, the attic, behind doors, under sinks. If there was a shadow big enough to hold a secret, I put smoke through it. That was over 20 years ago. The older kids are grown now, some in their 30s, some in their late 20s, and those houses still give everyone that same cold feeling when they come up in conversation. What I can say is this: in every place I've lived since, I have smudged, saged, and spoken ownership over the home. I have had 0 problems of the negative kind. And yes, I know that when I bring up house gnomes, borrowers, fae, whatever you want to call them, I sound a little off. I know that. But here's the thing. Once the negative presence stopped, odd things still happened. A single item would vanish from a table, then show up a day later in the exact spot where it was supposed to be. Not under a cushion, not in a drawer, right there, right where everyone had already looked. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's supernatural, cryptid, some strange little trick of the world, or just my own brain misplacing things and then quietly returning them to the scene of the crime. I call them house gnomes because it keeps me from feeling like I'm losing my grip when the disappearing acts happen. But there is a huge difference between that and what was in those houses. The Hat Man house had weight. It had anger. It had fear. It felt like something was feeding off us. The house gnome feeling is different. It's harmless. Confusing, yes. A little irritating, absolutely. But not dark. Not hungry. Not watching from the hallway. You mean the pale ones? The gray-looking beings? I've seen things like that too. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what they are, because I don't have solid proof. But I'll tell you honestly, they never felt like ordinary aliens to me. They felt more like something spiritual wearing an alien mask. Something that could slip in and out of this world when it wanted to. The first thing I tell you is this: don't panic. I know that's easier said than done, especially when something is already messing with your dreams. But fear seems to be what they want. When they get into your sleep, the dreams can turn violent, disturbing, and painful. The kind that jolts you awake with your heart pounding. And from what I've experienced, that fear seems to feed them somehow. Another thing I noticed is that they seem to hate the name of Jesus. They don't respond well to prayer, scripture, or anything holy. That's one reason I started wondering if these things are actually demons pretending to be something else. So here's what I'd suggest. Try to memorize a few prayers if you can. The Lord's Prayer, the St. Michael Prayer, and the Hail Mary. Keep them close in your mind so you can say them even when you're scared. And if you see those beings again, speak firmly. Rebuke them in the name of Jesus Christ. Renounce them. Reject them. Tell them they have no permission to be near you, your home, your mind, or your dreams. If they keep bothering you, especially through nightmares, say the St. Michael Prayer. I know that might sound intense, but I'm telling you, it helped me. St. Michael is powerful. And if you ever sense him or see him, don't be afraid. His presence can feel huge, but not in the same way those things feel huge. It feels protective. My feeling is that if they keep coming after someone, it may be because that person has a strong energy or spirit, and these things are trying to drain it. They act terrifying, but honestly, I think they're weak. They scare people because fear is all they know how to use. Without that fear, they don't seem to have much power. If things get worse, call a priest. Get holy water. Bless your home. Look up traditional house blessings and pray through each room. I'd also suggest holy salt if you can get it. I went through something similar a while back. My name's Marcella, and I'm not even Catholic, but Catholic prayers were what helped me fight back. When I started saying scripture out loud and praying with real conviction, those things reacted fast. They hated it. So no, I don't think you're making it up. I believe you're seeing something real, even if we don't fully understand what it is. I have theories, plenty of them, but I can't claim I have proof. What I can tell you is that prayer helped. Holy water helped. Holy salt helped. And when it got really bad, I played worship music in the house, anything that praised God, and let it run for hours. And if nothing else works, pray. Pray to Jesus. Whatever those things are, they really do not like him. And please, let me know what happens. I want to know if other people are experiencing this too, and whether the same things that helped me can help them fight it off. I want to tell you about the most frightening experience I've ever had online. It wasn't paranormal. There were no ghosts, no shadows moving in the corner, nothing like that. But honestly, it was more disturbing than any horror story I've ever heard. It started one night when I couldn't sleep. I was scrolling through this app called Friendly Shoulder, where people usually post about their problems, their loneliness, or whatever they need to get off their chest. That night, I saw a post from a user named @Chickadaloos. It was simple, something like, "I'm bored. Does anyone want to talk in private?" So I messaged her and asked what kinds of things she liked talking about, mostly just to find a normal topic and avoid awkward silence. She mentioned a few things, but one of them was dinosaurs. And I love dinosaurs, so that was it. We spent almost the whole night talking about them. Favorite species, weird facts, fossils, all of that. The only personal thing she told me was that she was from Peru, but that she was living in Brazil with her husband. Then she disappeared. For about 2 weeks, there was nothing. No replies, no sign of her. Then one day, she sent me a message that made my stomach drop. She said there were days when she couldn't talk because her husband didn't like her using the phone. According to her, he only let her have it when she behaved well, and even then, mostly just to play games. She also said she had to be careful because if he found out she was talking to other people, he would hit her. I remember answering something like, "That's a horrible relationship. Your husband sounds toxic. And besides, we're literally just talking about dinosaurs." But she replied, "Those are his rules. I have to obey him." After that, she vanished again. 3 days later, she messaged me asking for my WhatsApp. I gave it to her, and not long after, she video called me. And that's when everything changed. The person on the call was not an adult woman. It was clearly a little boy. He was wearing a wig, and his lips were painted. His face looked bruised. He had marks on him, like he had been beaten. Before I could even find the right words, he started crying. He told me he had been orphaned and had been living on the streets. Then, according to him, some man had offered to take him in, but only if he married him and changed himself into a girl. He said that was the condition for having a roof over his head. I froze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do fast enough. Then I heard a man's voice shouting in the background. The boy panicked and ended the call. And that was the last time I ever saw him. After that, every account disappeared. His WhatsApp was gone. His profile on Friendly Shoulder was gone. Everything was erased, like someone had wiped him off the internet. I spent weeks trying to find him again. I kept posting about what happened on the app, hoping someone might recognize the story or know who he was. I posted it so many times that the app eventually banned me for spam. Before that happened, a few users told me they thought they knew who I was talking about. Some said they had also noticed that the way she wrote sounded strangely childish, even though the account claimed to belong to an adult woman. I still think about him. I think that call was his way of asking for help. Maybe the only way he knew how. Because where does a child like that go? A child who might not be in school, who is living in another country, who may not speak the language well, and who probably doesn't trust the police. I know the obvious answer should have been to call the authorities, but in that moment, everything happened so quickly, and from his side, I think he was terrified. That experience has stayed with me more than anything else I've ever seen online. Not because it was supernatural, because it was real. I was 17 when this happened, and even now, years later, it still drifts back into my mind more often than I'd like to admit. My family was living in this old farmhouse from the late 1800s. It had that creaky, settled-in feeling old houses have, where every floorboard seems to know more than it's telling. But the strangest thing about it was that the house felt like two completely different places stitched together. Our side looked original. Old trim, older windows, the kind of rooms that felt like they had been standing there forever. But the other half, where our landlord lived, looked totally different. It had this very 1970s feel to it. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured people just had different taste. Then the dreams started. For months after we moved in, I kept having these dreams that felt way too real. Some of them were through my own eyes. Some felt like I was floating outside the scene, watching it happen. And sometimes, I was seeing everything through someone else's eyes. It was always a woman. She wore a pale blue dress that looked like something from the 1960s, and she was always crying. She would move through the house, searching for something. Desperate, heartbroken. But she never found whatever it was before I woke up. Eventually, I told my mom about it, and the look on her face changed immediately. She told me she had been having dreams too, only in hers, it wasn't the woman she saw. It was a baby she heard. She said she could hear it crying somewhere in the house, and in the dream, she would run from room to room trying to find it. She'd be panicked, calling out, searching everywhere, but she never found the baby. That alone unsettled me. But what happened next is what I still can't explain. One afternoon, I came home from school exhausted and decided to take a nap on the couch before starting homework. I fell asleep, and the dream began again. Only this time, the woman wasn't wandering through the house. She was standing over me, watching me sleep. In the dream, I pushed myself up a little and asked her, "Who are you?" She didn't answer. She just stepped closer and reached out her hand, like she wanted to help me up. I thought maybe she wanted me to follow her, maybe to show me something, maybe to explain who she was. So I took her hand. And it burned. I mean, it genuinely felt like I had grabbed a piece of metal straight out of a fire. The pain was so sharp and sudden that I woke up instantly. When I looked down, my hand was bright red. Not just flushed either. There was a mark on it, almost perfectly shaped like where her fingers had touched mine. I was sitting there staring at it, completely stunned, when my mom came home from work. She walked in, saw my face, and said, "Lena, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay?" And in that moment, I suddenly knew. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew with complete certainty. I told her, "The woman from my dreams died in a fire, here, on the other side of the house, and the baby died too. She's been looking for her baby." My mom went still. Then she sat down very slowly and said, "I know." That was when she told me she had started looking into the history of the house after we realized we were both dreaming about something connected. She had found out there had been a terrible fire in the 1960s. Half the house burned, and a woman and her 6-month-old baby died in it. Afterward, that side of the house was rebuilt to match the outside, but the inside was completely different. That was why our landlord's half looked like it belonged to another time. Because it did. I never saw the woman again after that. No more dreams, no more crying, no more searching. I've always hoped that maybe she just needed someone to know what happened to her. Maybe once we understood, she didn't have to keep wandering through that house anymore. It was the strangest, most frightening thing I've ever experienced. And even though almost 15 years have passed, I can still remember that red mark on my hand like it happened yesterday. I'm happy to tell it. This happened when I was 15, sometime around 1992, maybe 1993. I was living in Southern California then, and every weekend my dad would drive us out from Orange County to Palm Desert because my parents had a place there. They loved golfing, so that was the routine. Every single weekend. And honestly, when you're 15, being dragged out to the desert every weekend feels like punishment with better scenery. My dad usually picked me up after school, somewhere around 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon. Depending on traffic and whether we stopped for food, we'd normally get to the house around 7, maybe 7:30 at the latest. But that night, we didn't arrive until almost 10. I remember we had finally gotten past the worst of the traffic and were driving through this quieter, hilly stretch of road. It felt remote, the kind of place where the world starts to thin out a little. I was staring out the window, thinking about my friends and wondering what they were doing that weekend without me. That's when I noticed a bright light in the sky. At first, I wasn't really alarmed. I was just sort of watching it while my mind wandered. But after a while, I snapped out of my thoughts and really looked at it. I remember thinking, what is that? I asked my dad, and he said it was probably a planet. That sounded reasonable enough, so I let it go for a bit. But even while I went back to daydreaming, my eyes kept returning to that light. Eventually, we came out of the hills and reached the higher desert area where the wind turbines are. By then, both of us were watching it because it seemed bigger and closer. My dad started talking quickly, saying it was probably landing lights from a small plane since there was a little airport somewhere nearby. And for a moment, that made sense too. Then we passed the wind farm, and suddenly we were on this dark, empty stretch of road. I don't remember seeing any other cars, just black sky, black road, and this light ahead of us. It kept getting larger until it was right in front of us, huge and blazing, almost like the moon had dropped down to eye level. I couldn't make out a craft or any kind of shape behind it because it was so intensely bright. The contrast of that light against the empty dark was honestly terrifying. I remember saying, "Dad, I really don't think those are airplane landing lights." And this is the part that still feels strange to say out loud, but I had the strongest feeling that whatever it was could hear me. Not just my voice either, my thoughts too. It felt like it reacted the second I realized it wasn't what my dad was trying to explain it away as. The light started pulsing. I had this eerie impression that I had noticed it, and it knew I had noticed it, like it had been caught. Then it went completely dark. Gone. Just gone. It felt like only a few seconds passed. Then the light came back on, brighter than before. It rose up from where it had been, hovered for a moment, and then shot straight up into the sky. It vanished faster than anything I've ever seen. Faster than lightning. Right after that, I suddenly had to pee so badly it almost hurt. It was weird because I hadn't needed to go at all before, and then all at once, it felt like I'd been holding it forever. I looked at the clock to see how much longer we had, and it was around 9:30. That confused me, but not in a clear, logical way. I just remember feeling foggy about it, like my brain didn't want to grab onto the thought too tightly. I recognized some landmarks and knew we were only about 30 minutes from the house, so I mostly focused on just making it there. When we pulled up, my stepmom was outside waiting for us. She was furious, which was completely unlike her. She was usually calm, polished, very composed. But that night she was visibly shaken, asking where we had been and why we were so late. I barely slowed down because I was rushing inside to use the bathroom, but as I passed her, I called back, "Dad and I saw a UFO!" And the strange thing is, I hadn't even thought to call it that until the words came out of my mouth. So that's my missing time story. There was another experience years later, during the week I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, but that one belongs to another night. I should probably start by saying the house wasn't some ancient, falling apart place with creaky floorboards and ivy crawling up the walls. It was just a normal terraced house, with neighbors pressed up on both sides of us. From the outside, there was nothing strange about it at all. But upstairs, right at the back of the house, at the very end of the hall, there was this one room. That room was mine when I was growing up, and I hated it. I mean, really hated it. I could never explain why properly, especially as a kid, but being in there always felt wrong. Heavy almost, like the room was waiting for you to notice something. When I was little, I had bunk beds, and I always slept on the top one because, obviously, that was the cool place to sleep. But I used to have these awful dreams about a figure standing at the end of the bed, just watching me. Not doing anything, just standing there. And I used to fall out of that top bunk all the time in my sleep. I'd hit the floor hard enough that my mom could hear it from downstairs, but I wouldn't wake up. Not even a little. It happened so often that it somehow became normal. She'd come upstairs, find me on the floor, pick me up, and put me in the bottom bunk. Years later, me and my mom swapped rooms. I moved into the front bedroom, and she took the back one. Except she didn't really take it. After we swapped, she almost never slept in there. She started sleeping downstairs on the couch instead. If you asked her about it, she'd just say she preferred the couch, but come on. Nobody chooses a couch over a proper bed every night unless something about that bed or that room feels worse. In my new room, my bed was against the wall that joined onto that back bedroom. I don't know if this means anything, but neither of my dogs would sleep on that side of the bed. Not once. If I tried to move them over there, they'd panic, scramble away, and jump straight off. Full-on fear, not just being stubborn. There were a few things that happened to me that I still think about. One night, I was at my desk playing Counter-Strike, completely locked in. My desk faced the wall, and there was nobody else in the house. Out of nowhere, a scrunched-up ball of paper landed right in front of me on the keyboard. Not beside me, not behind me, right there. I just froze, because there was no way for it to have come from anywhere that made sense. Another night, I was walking downstairs to go outside for a cigarette. The light at the top of the stairs never worked, so that part of the house was always dark. I was about halfway down when something shot past my ear and slammed into the wooden floor at the bottom. I couldn't see what it was until I got downstairs and turned the hallway light on. It was a lighter, and it wasn't mine. Mine was in my pocket. Then there was one night when I was washing dishes, and I suddenly burst into tears. Not a little bit either. I mean proper, uncontrollable crying. I'm not really an emotional person, and nothing bad had happened around that time. I wasn't thinking about anything upsetting. It just came out of nowhere. My mom got really worried and kept asking what was wrong, and all I could say was, I don't know. I don't know. That might honestly have scared me more than some of the physical stuff, because it didn't feel like it belonged to me. My mom technically still lives in that house, but she spends almost all her time at her partner's place now. She'd deny anything strange ever happened there, unless she'd had a few drinks. Then little things would slip out. I moved out when I was 18. I'm 26 now, and I haven't slept a single night there since. I barely even go inside. My girlfriend refuses to step foot in the place. She says whenever she's there, she feels violently sick, and she says my mood changes when I'm in the house. The strange thing is, I live in a completely normal house now. No weird noises, no objects flying around, no horrible rooms at the end of the hall. And this might sound messed up, but sometimes I almost miss it. Not the fear exactly, just the feeling that there was something there. Some kind of company, even if it was the kind you really didn't ask for. You can believe me or not. I'm not here to convince anyone. I just know what happened in that house, and after all these years, it still follows me a little. So this happened back in 2008 when I was dating a woman named Marin. She was really into horror movies, ghost stories, the whole strange little midnight carnival of it all. One night, she got it in her head that she wanted to use a Ouija board. I didn't own one, and honestly, I wasn't about to go buy one. I was working as a graphic designer at the time, so I figured, fine, I'll just make one. I designed it myself, printed it at work on this thick, glossy photo paper, and brought it home. Marin put it in a frame, and she already had one of those little planchette things, the piece you rest your fingers on. Since the board was under glass, it slid around pretty easily. Now, before I go any further, I should say this clearly. I don't think of myself as a superstitious person. I'm not someone who automatically jumps to ghosts or demons every time a house creaks. But I've seen enough odd things and heard enough strange things to leave the door open a crack. I don't know what's really out there. Maybe there are overlapping realities. Maybe there are dimensions brushing against ours like pages in a book. Maybe this whole thing is something stranger than we're built to understand. Human eyes can't even see the full spectrum of color, so who knows what else we're missing? And then there are things like the Mandela effect, where huge groups of people remember the same thing differently. Sure, memory is slippery, but millions of people being wrong in the same direction? That always felt a little harder to explain. Anyway, back to that night. We did the usual Ouija board routine. Fingers on the piece, asking questions, watching it drift from letter to letter. I honestly don't remember much of what it spelled out. I wasn't taking it seriously. In fact, I was trying very hard not to take it seriously, because deep down, I didn't really like messing with that kind of thing. When the planchette moved, I just assumed Marin was doing it. Maybe she thought I was doing it. Nothing dramatic happened. No lights flickering, no whispers, no horror movie nonsense. I think she was trying to contact a relative, maybe her grandmother. When we were finished, I told her I didn't want that thing sitting around my apartment. So I took the board out of the frame and threw it away. The next day, I came home from work, opened the closet, and there it was. The board was back in the frame, sitting on the floor. I asked Marin if she had taken it out of the trash, and she said no. At first, I thought she had to be messing with me, but her face changed. She looked genuinely worried, not playful, not guilty, just concerned. So I took it out of the frame again. This time, I walked it all the way out to the dumpsters. I bent the glossy sheet as much as I could, shoved it down into the trash, and left it there. The reason I hadn't crumpled it the first time was because it wasn't regular paper. It was thick photo stock, the kind that doesn't just fold up neatly unless you really mean it. A couple of months later, we found out Marin was pregnant. We decided we needed a bigger place, so I found an apartment across town. We packed everything up over a weekend. Back then, I had a lot of old music gear. I used to play in bands, and even though some health problems later made it hard for me to play like I used to, I never liked getting rid of my instruments and equipment. Most of it was stored in the coat closet. So I opened that closet to start packing, and sitting right there with my music gear was the Ouija board. In the same frame. And the paper was perfect. No bends, no wrinkles, no crease marks, nothing. It looked like it had never been thrown away at all. I just stood there staring at it. Then I called Marin over and showed her. This time, she was scared too. Not pretend scared, not "this is fun" scared. Actually scared. So we both took it outside together. I smashed the frame into pieces. Then I set the board on fire. We stood there and watched the whole thing burn until there was nothing useful left of it. After that, we threw the broken frame pieces into the dumpster. I also made her get rid of the planchette. We moved a few days later. We never saw the board again. And I still don't have an explanation. A few years after that, when our son was still a toddler, something else happened that I try not to think about too much. One day, he tried to walk straight into the fireplace. We stopped him immediately, obviously, and asked him why he would do something so dangerous. He told us there were children living inside the fireplace. He said they talked to him through the wall. He said they wanted him to come play. I made him promise me, right then and there, that he would never, ever do anything like that again. He's 18 now. Just a few days ago, he got on a bus to visit his girlfriend in another state. I hadn't thought about any of this in years, but after he left, this sudden wave of fear came over me. It was sharp and heavy and out of nowhere. It passed. I'm okay now. But it was strange, really strange, because I hadn't seen anything or read anything that reminded me of that board in a long time. And then, suddenly, there it was again in my mind, clear as glass. I don't know what any of it means. I only know what happened. I bought a house with my ex-wife not long after we got married. Funny enough, today would have been our anniversary. Before we moved in, one of the neighbors tried pretty hard to talk us out of buying the place. He told us, in this hushed, dramatic way, that several people had died there. At the time, we just brushed it off. We figured every old rural house probably had a story or two rattling around in the walls, so we signed the papers and moved in. A few years later, I started a new job, and one of my coworkers, Darren, happened to mention that he was related to the family we bought the house from. That's when the real story started to come out. The house had been built in the mid-1960s by a German couple who had fled Europe during World War II. That part made sense, because when we moved in, we found boxes of old German books tucked away in the house, the kind of stuff that felt like it had been waiting quietly in the corners for decades. They had a big family. Their kids had kids of their own, and one of those grandkids was the man who eventually sold the place to us. From what Darren told me, around the early 2000s, the wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. Her husband more or less gave up the rest of his life to care for her. He waited on her, cooked for her, handled her medicine, spent their savings, and stayed by her side through all of it. By the time we bought the house, there was still an old hospital bed in one of the bedrooms. There were cases of medical supplies in closets too. At the time, I didn't know the full story. I just thought it was strange and sad. Apparently, after many years, she became bedridden, and he almost never left the house anymore. He was her full-time caretaker. This next part is mostly family speculation, passed around and softened by time. But one morning he left to run errands. The house was way out in the country, so even something simple, like paying a bill in person, could turn into a long trip. When he came home, he found that his wife had finally lost her fight with cancer. And I guess the grief just swallowed him whole. The way Darren told it, the husband took a bottle of her pain pills, swallowed all of them, laid down beside her, and died next to the woman he had spent years trying to save. I'm not going to pretend that didn't get to me. I was sitting there at work, listening to this story about my own house, and I was genuinely crying. It was awful and beautiful in the saddest possible way. But then the story took a strange turn. For some reason, none of their children wanted anything to do with the house after that. Nobody wanted to clean it out. Nobody wanted to sell it. Nobody even seemed interested in the money. It just kept getting passed from one family member to another, like an unwanted heirloom with too much weight attached to it. Eventually, one of the grandkids asked basically, "If I deal with selling it, can I keep the money?" And everyone agreed, probably just relieved that somebody was finally willing to handle it. So we started cleaning the place out. And that's when they found an unbelievable amount of old German adult material hidden throughout the house. I'm not exactly prudish, and I try not to judge what consenting adults are into, but apparently some of it was disturbing enough that the police got involved. That is about as much detail as I ever wanted or needed to know. There was one more strange thing about that house, and I never told my ex-wife this part. About a year after we moved in, our very old cat passed away. I wanted to bury her somewhere peaceful, so I picked what looked like an old garden plot in the backyard. I started digging and hit bones. Animal bones, as far as I could tell. I didn't want to bury my cat in what felt like another animal's grave, so I covered them back up and picked another spot. More bones. So I tried again. More bones. I must have dug 10 different holes across that yard, and every single time I found more of them. Not just one little patch either. They were spread out over a pretty large area. Eventually, I got too creeped out to keep going, so I carried my cat around to the front yard and buried her beneath a magnolia tree. Thankfully, that spot was bone-free. I can understand what it feels like to be sensitive to things most people don't notice. I don't really talk about it often, because it sounds strange even to me, but there have been times when I felt like I was receiving messages from people who had already passed. Most of the time, they seem to come from people who died suddenly, especially by suicide. My feeling is that they aren't fully settled yet, or maybe there's something they desperately need someone living to hear. The first time it happened, I wasn't looking for it. I didn't invite it in. I was just trying to fall asleep. I remember lying there in the dark, almost drifting off, when this intense sensation came over me. It felt like my whole body was vibrating from the inside. There were these deep, humming sounds in my head, almost like echoes in a tunnel, and flashes of color behind my closed eyes. It reminded me a little of those jolts you get as a child when you're half asleep and suddenly feel like you're falling, except this was much stronger, much more deliberate. I sat up fast and shook my head, trying to make it stop. For some reason, I felt like I was about to cry, even though I didn't know why. Then it happened again, and again, maybe 4 times in a row. Finally, I gave up on sleeping and went into the living room to watch television for a while, just to feel normal again. About half an hour later, I went back to bed. This time, whatever it was came through softer. It was still there, but gentler, almost like it was approaching from far away. I remember thinking, all right, what do you need to say? Because clearly you're not going to let me sleep. And then everything changed. The noise stopped. The colors stopped. Suddenly I was a man, tall, thin, completely bare, sitting in the dark at the edge of a high ridge or cliff. I couldn't see what was below me. I only knew it was very far down. I was hugging my knees, rocking back and forth. My teeth were chattering. My breathing was broken from sobbing, but there were no tears left. I got the impression of a short name. At first it flickered in my mind, like Rob or Dan, but it wouldn't settle. Then I stood up. I stretched my arms out, lifted my face, closed my eyes, and stepped forward. The second he stepped off, I wasn't in his body anymore. I was in his mind, and what came through was instant regret. Not a little regret. Not a thought passing by. It was everything. There was this long, terrible moment where he realized he wanted nothing more than to have his feet back on solid ground. He wanted to undo it. He wanted the smallest chance to choose differently. It was shocking how fast everything had changed. 1 second, there was still a choice. The next second, there wasn't. I never felt the impact. I never experienced the actual death. I think that part was missing because he was already gone. Instead, I suddenly saw a woman from above, unlocking her front door after work. It was like I could see through the roof of her house. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I recognized the long hair. I recognized the house, the land around it, the little lane. She was someone I had only met once years before. At the time, my boyfriend and I had rented a small place one summer from his uncle, and this woman lived across the lane. One afternoon, we stopped by with his uncle because they were going to give her an estimate for painting the outside of her house. I remember waving and saying, "Hi, neighbor," just being friendly. While we were standing there talking about paint and supplies, a man came out of the house wearing cycling clothes with a bike over his shoulder. She introduced him as her husband. He kissed her quickly on the cheek and said he was going for a ride. Then he left. That was it. Just a tiny moment. Life went on. Years later, I was helping my boyfriend's uncle plant flowers at another property in a nearby town when he mentioned her name. He said he had recently run into her after not seeing her for years, and they were planning to have coffee. The second he said it, I went completely still. I was right back in that experience again. He had to tap me on the shoulder because I wasn't answering him. I was nervous, but I finally told him what had happened. I told him about the man at the cliff, about the regret, about the message, and about the short name that felt like Rob or Dan. He stared at me for a moment and said, "Like Tom?" And when he said that name, something in my chest settled. I knew. I said, "Yes, just like Tom." Then he reminded me that the man we had met that day, the one with the bicycle, had been named Tom. He told me Tom had taken his own life about a year after that brief meeting. I was stunned. Eventually, his uncle passed the message along to her. The message was that it wasn't her fault, that he had felt lost before he did it, but the regret came immediately. He wanted her to know he could hear her when she spoke to him, and that when she felt lonely, she could talk to him out loud because he was listening. Years later, when I was going through a very hard time myself, I got a phone call one evening from a soft-spoken woman. Her voice was trembling. She simply told me thank you. She said I had no idea how much I had helped her. And then I realized she was crying. This was in the old gold country hills of California, and even now, when I think about it, I don't remember it as something frightening. I remember it as grief trying to find a doorway. And somehow, for a little while, I became that doorway. Anyway, I've always been sensitive to things like this, and I think that's probably why I had so many more experiences than my two half-sisters did. The first house we lived in had what I can only describe as 3 portals. 2 of them felt almost like airport terminals. Spirits, or whatever they were, would move through my room from one closet to the other, and it was like they didn't even notice me. They were just passing through. But the third one was different. That one was in the basement, and it felt like the source of something dark. There was this malevolent presence down there, and it seemed to have smaller, chaotic little trickster-type energies around it. They stirred things up constantly. Things would happen in the house, and my sister was the one who got blamed for most of it, even though I knew it wasn't her. Eventually, my parents sold that house. They built a new one on a piece of the land they kept, not far from the original property. And that house had its own presence. There was an old man there. Every night I would hear him walk into my room. I could feel him sit down on the edge of my bed. I was scared, but at the same time, I wasn't. That probably sounds strange, but it's the only way I know how to explain it. There was fear, yes, but not the kind that told me I was in danger. Looking back now, my instincts tell me he may have been connected to the land somehow. Maybe he had owned it before. Maybe he stayed because he was watching over me. I've wondered if he was protecting me from whatever was still lingering across the yard, back at the first house. This was on the outskirts of St. Louis, where old energy seems to sit quietly in the soil. Historical places are hard for me too. Museums, old buildings, battlefields. Sometimes the residual energy is so thick it feels like walking through weather. And then there's intelligent energy, the kind that knows you're there. That can be overwhelming. Honestly, it's gotten harder for me as I've gotten older. I had what I believe was a demonic attack once while I was on a work trip in North Carolina. That one was rough. I still don't like thinking about it too much. Another time I was traveling for work and so focused on the job that I didn't even realize where I was. One night I was driving back to my hotel late and this crushing sadness came over me. It was heavy, sudden, and deep. Then I looked around and realized I was passing a Civil War battlefield. I hadn't even noticed it before. During the day, the place didn't feel the same, but at night, it was like everything woke up. After that, everywhere I went in that area felt heavy. I think I had accidentally dropped whatever block I usually keep up, and it's become harder and harder for me to hold those blocks in place. Now I live in a suburb outside Kansas City, near where the Oregon, Santa Fe, and California trails all come together. On top of that, we're right in the path of the border war and bleeding Kansas history from the Civil War era. There is so much activity here, and most people have no idea. When we were looking for the house we live in now, every single home we toured had something going on. Full hauntings. Not just a creak here or a strange feeling there. Real activity. Even my husband, who is a skeptic and an engineer, had experiences in two of them. That alone told me I wasn't imagining it. Our last house had what I'd call a hungry elemental. That was one of the hardest situations I've dealt with. I had to coax it into letting us leave. It felt like negotiating with something old, stubborn, and not remotely human. The house we bought now had fairly good energy, thankfully. There was someone here at first, someone I called Grandpa, though I don't know who he really was. It took a few months, but eventually he moved on. My sense was that he went to be near someone from his own family. Now, what we mostly have are what I call pass-throughs. The house just seems to sit along a route that certain spirits use. They aren't necessarily here for us. They're just moving through. I try not to engage with them. I don't want them to get comfortable. I don't want them to think this is a place to stay. I do think I need some kind of protection around the property, something that encourages them to walk around instead of through. But I'm nervous about doing it wrong. My fear is that instead of keeping things out, I could accidentally lock something in. I've been touched a few times here. We've also had some poltergeist-type activity, though I honestly think some of that may have come from me during a time when I was in a very bad mental place. I've learned that energy can spill out of people in ways we don't always understand. One of the wildest things happened in the backyard. I was planting flowers, and I was leaning on my shovel while looking at the spot where I planned to put some candy tuft. Out of nowhere, I felt this rush of energy come up behind me. It wasn't wind. It had weight to it. Then I felt a hand press against my lower back and push me to the side. A few seconds later, I felt another presence rush past, and I heard someone yell after the first one. It felt like two young men, or maybe boys, running through the yard, one chasing the other. And the thing is, I don't think it was residual. If it had been, it wouldn't have moved me. It wouldn't have cared that I was standing there. But this one pushed me aside, almost like I was in the way. I lost my balance and caught myself on the shovel right before my knee hit the ground. It shook me up. I just stood there afterward, trying to process what had happened. It hasn't happened again, but when I'm out in the garden, I often feel people watching me. Not in a threatening way, more like they approve of what I'm doing, like they're pleased the land is being cared for. I have so many experiences like this. Part of me wants to visit famous haunted places just to see what's really there. But I don't dare. I'm too worried about bringing something home with me. An attachment is not something I want to risk. And honestly, I know I need help protecting this property. Because even though most of what comes through seems to keep moving, there's always the chance that something unpleasant could decide not to pass through at all. It could decide to stay. I want to tell you about something that happened to me in the summer of 2020. My partner Eli and I were driving from Colorado up to Boise, Idaho, to visit his family and join them for a camping trip. It's a long haul, about 15 hours, and after spending most of the day in the car, we were itching to get out and move around. Since I'd lived in Utah before, I was excited to show him one of my favorite places, the hot springs near Spanish Fork. They're tucked deep in Diamond Fork Canyon, and getting there means a good hike from the parking area, close to 45 minutes or so. But after 7 hours on the road, that actually sounded perfect to us. When we got to the first parking lot, though, the gate was locked shut. There was a sign posted on it saying the springs were closed, no access allowed, with a pretty steep fine if anyone ignored it. We were so disappointed. At that point, so many places had shut down because of COVID, but we really thought an outdoor spot like that might still be open. Later, after checking online, we found something unsettling. There had apparently been reports that a body was found near the springs, which may have been why the whole area was closed off. So instead of soaking in the springs, we drove back down the canyon looking for somewhere to camp for the night. A lot of the official campsites were either closed or already full, which honestly didn't bother us too much. We've always liked dispersed camping better anyway. We ended up turning onto this random side road, Road 338, just to see where it led. Most of it was a decent dirt road. We passed a few nice spots by a creek, and there were maybe a couple other campers already settled in for the night. But we kept going because sometimes you just get this feeling that the right campsite is still a little farther ahead. Eventually the road ended, and off to the right there was a fire road branching off. Right there at the turn was this strange boulder, partly enclosed by a little wooden fence with an inscription carved into it. Of course I had to go look. It said, "Diamond Battle, June 20th, 1866. The second I read it, everything shifted. I remember feeling this wave of uneasiness, but also respect. Just standing there, realizing that something violent and important had happened on that land, it stayed with me. We drove a little farther up the fire road, but nothing really stood out, so we doubled back and chose one of the creekside spots we'd passed earlier. It was getting dark fast by then, but we got the tent up quickly and started a fire. The creek was loud enough to fill the silence, but in a peaceful way. Still, ever since I'd seen that memorial, I couldn't shake this strange feeling. I'm not usually a nervous person, but I felt alert in a way I couldn't explain. It was like something was watching us from the trees across the water. Not threatening exactly, just present. And as it got darker, that feeling only got stronger. After a while, I told myself I was just tired and a little spooked, but I decided I didn't want to sit out in the open anymore. So I went into the tent to try to sleep, while Eli stayed by the fire a little longer. I curled up into the sleeping bag and started listening to the sounds around me. The creek seemed quieter from inside the tent, softer somehow. I was just on the edge of sleep when I heard it. Soft chanting. Then drums. My eyes flew open. I lay there completely still, trying to listen harder over the sound of the water. I couldn't make out every detail, but I know I heard it. And then I realized the ground felt like it was trembling too, like horses were moving down the road, not far from where we were camped. I remember thinking I should get out and tell Eli, but I also had this overwhelming feeling that if I said it out loud, it would become too real. Like I'd be acknowledging something ancient that had already made itself known. Before I could decide what to do, I fell asleep. And somehow, it was one of the most peaceful nights of sleep I've ever had. The next morning, we packed up, cleaned everything carefully, and left no trace behind. Once we got back into cell service, I looked up the memorial and started reading about Diamond Fork. That's when I learned there really had been a battle there, between the Ute people and Mormon militia, and lives were lost on that mountainside. When I finished reading, I finally told Eli what I'd heard the night before. The chanting, the drums, even what sounded like horses. He just stared at me and said he'd heard the same thing. He told me that not long after I went into the tent, he got uneasy standing there alone by the fire. Then he started hearing the distant drumming and chanting too, and it scared him enough that he came inside. And just like me, once he was in the tent, he slept deeply and peacefully. I still think about that night. What I felt there wasn't cruel or angry. It felt strong, calm, and protective. Almost as if the spirits of those who lost their lives on that land were still there, watching, remembering, and maybe even watching over the people who passed through with respect. So if you ever find yourself on Diamond Fork Road, I hope you stop and visit that memorial. I hope you stand there quietly for a moment and pay your respects. And maybe, if the land chooses to let you feel it, you'll understand exactly what I mean. So, I need to tell you what's been happening because honestly, It started to get under my skin. For about the last couple of weeks, my sleep has been completely off. No matter whether I'm going to bed for the night or just taking a short nap, I keep having these really vivid dreams where I feel trapped. It's like I know I'm dreaming, and I'm trying so hard to wake myself up, but I just can't. When I finally do come to, I feel awful, heavy, groggy, almost like I'm coming out of anesthesia. And the weirdest part is I've been sleeping way longer than usual, like 10 to 12 hours sometimes, when normally I'm more of a 6 to 8 hour person. The dreams themselves have been unsettling too. A lot of them take place in places from when I was younger, but everything feels wrong in them. Familiar, but twisted. Off. Like something's there that shouldn't be. Then my older sister Marissa told me something that really shook me. A few days ago, she was walking past my room while my door was open, and she noticed, out of the corner of her eye, that something inside my room was moving at the same pace as she was. At first, she thought it was me, but then she realized it wasn't. She said it looked like me, but like an older version of me, back when I had long hair years ago. She told me it was looking at her in this strange way, almost like it was studying how to move, like it was trying to copy her walk and figure out how to do it right. She said she saw it twice that same day. Both times, it felt like it was mocking her movements. She brushed it off at first, but then she came into the kitchen, saw me there, and told me immediately because she knew something wasn't right. And then last night, things got even worse. I stayed over at my boyfriend's house, and before I settled in, I texted my younger sister Mia because her room is across from mine. I asked her to make sure my bedroom door was shut since I wasn't home. She didn't answer right away because her phone was on Do Not Disturb. Later, when she got home, she walked down the hall toward her room. She was being kind of noisy, keys clanking against her water bottle, the kind of sound that usually would have annoyed me if I'd been asleep. She said right then she heard my bedroom door open. And just as she got close to her own room, she heard a voice whisper, "What are you doing?" She said she immediately thought it was me, irritated that she was making so much noise. So she looked up, moving her hair out of her face, expecting to see me standing there. But my door was open, and no one was there. She rushed into the bathroom, grabbed her phone, and that's when she saw my text from about 20 minutes earlier, asking her to shut my door because I wasn't even home. She was terrified. She called me right away, and we started FaceTiming. My boyfriend was joking around about it at first, but I told him to stop. I didn't want him making fun of whatever this is. I know that sounds dramatic, but I meant it. The whole thing felt wrong. Then, all of a sudden, the FaceTime call just ended. Not like a normal failed call, not frozen, not glitchy. It just beeped on both ends, like one of us had hung up. I thought maybe her phone had died, but almost immediately she texted me asking, "Did your phone die?" And I told her no, because I thought hers had. That's what scared me most. Neither of us ended the call. And now I can't shake this feeling that something is in my room. The energy in there feels heavy and uncomfortable, like I'm being watched. My sleep has been so abnormal, and when I do manage to wake up, it feels like something is pulling me right back under again. I don't know what this thing is, or why it seems to be imitating me. I don't know if it's just some strange presence, something attached to the room, or something darker. I've tried looking for answers, and haven't found anything that really matches what's been happening. I'm telling you because I honestly don't know what to make of it anymore. And at this point, I just want to understand what could possibly be going on. You know how some places feel tucked outside the regular world? My family has a vacation house in a tiny town in Maine, the kind of place where maybe 100 people live there year-round, and everybody knows everybody else's business before breakfast. We've had that house forever, and growing up, we were there constantly. Every holiday, most summer weekends, all of it. So it never felt unfamiliar to us. That is probably why what happened felt so wrong. This started a few days before Thanksgiving in 2022. We were driving up to the house, and I was riding with my mom and dad. My sister and her husband were in the car behind us. We were maybe 25 minutes away, and I was half asleep, just staring out the window, when I noticed what I first thought was a scarecrow standing off the side of the road. But then we got closer, and it was not a scarecrow. It was a man. Young, probably late 20s, maybe early 30s. He was painfully thin, with pale skin that looked almost gray in the cold light. He had long, dark hair hanging in greasy strings around his face, and he was wearing loose jeans and a dirty t-shirt, no coat, even though it was freezing out. But the worst part was the way he was standing. His arms were held out awkwardly, limp at the elbows, his head tilted to one side, and he had this expression that I still do not know how to describe without sounding dramatic. It was like he was trying to look human and almost getting it right. I said, "Oh my God," and my mom looked up from her book and asked what was wrong. I told her there was a creepy guy on the side of the road. My dad laughed and said I had probably seen a scarecrow. And for a second, I thought maybe he was right. Then my sister called me from the car behind us and said, "Did you see that guy back there?" I said, "So it was a real person?" And she said, "Yes." Chris slowed down to look at him, and he winked at us. That was the moment the mood changed. My sister is not someone who exaggerates. She is practical, grounded, annoyingly rational most of the time. So when I heard the tension in her voice, I felt it too. We got to the house without seeing him again, and later that evening my sister and I drove to a general store in the next town over to grab beer. On the way there, we saw him again, just walking along the side of the road. And here is why that terrified us. There was no possible way he should have been there. It had been less than an hour since we first saw him, and this second spot was roughly 30 miles away. He had no car. There had been nothing around him the first time. No driveway, no house, no gas station, no parked vehicle. Just woods and road. My sister kept saying, "How did he get here?" And I kept trying to talk myself into some normal explanation, but none of them sounded convincing out loud. We hurried into the store, hoping he would keep going. Instead, he came in after us. The store owner knew us well, and the second this guy stepped inside, the whole place went strangely quiet. The owner looked right at him and said, "Can I help you, son?" In that tone people use when they already know something is off. The guy just stood in the doorway, staring blankly ahead. The owner asked again, louder this time, and finally the man turned and said, "No," in this low, flat voice, then walked right back out. The owner asked if we knew him, and my sister told him about seeing him by the road earlier. He could tell we were rattled, so when we left, he walked us to the car himself. The guy was gone by then. We did not see him again for 2 days. Then, on the third day, my sister, her husband, and I were driving to a grocery store almost an hour away to do last-minute Thanksgiving shopping. As we passed the general store, there he was, sitting on a wooden planter box near the sign out front like he had been waiting. The second our car went by, he stood up. I turned to watch him through the back window. He started running after us. Not jogging, not shambling, running. Fast. Not impossibly fast, but wrong fast. Fast enough that all of us noticed immediately. My sister was looking in the side mirror and freaking out, so Chris hit the gas and we lost him. But the whole rest of the drive she kept talking about it, trying to make it make sense. Then we got to the grocery store. We shopped for about an hour, and right as we were checking out, My sister realized she had left the reusable bags in the car. I told her I would go get them. I walked out into the parking lot, headed toward our car, and saw him standing near a telephone pole at the edge of the lot, just watching me. I ran straight back inside. I found my sister and Chris in line and said, "He's out there." My sister thought I was joking at first. Then she saw my face. Chris got angry in that protective way people do when they are scared but do not want to admit it, and he stormed outside to confront him. By the time we finished checking out and came back out, Chris was already in the car, pale and visibly shaken. He told us to get in. When we were driving home, he finally explained what had happened. He said that as soon as he started toward the man, the guy bolted across the street and into a wooded area behind some houses. But what really scared him was not that he ran. It was how he ran. Chris said he moved in this uneven, loping, almost animal way, using his hands and feet together for a few strides, like his body did not care about the normal rules for how people are supposed to move. And Chris is in great shape. He runs all the time. He said there was no way he could have caught him. On the way back, we stopped again at the general store. The owner told us the guy had been there earlier, lingering inside for over an hour without buying anything, barely speaking, just waiting. Then, according to the owner, he had gone outside and sat on that planter box for hours, until suddenly he jumped up and sprinted off at the exact moment we drove by. That night was Thanksgiving Eve, and the whole thing had settled over us like a fog. My mom had still not seen him herself, so she thought maybe we were working ourselves up. My dad was skeptical too. He kept treating it like some eccentric drifter passing through. Then, after Thanksgiving dinner, one of our dogs started losing her mind at the back door. Now, this dog hardly ever barked unless something was truly wrong. We lived around wildlife up there: deer, coyotes, bobcats, even bears sometimes, and she never reacted like that. This was different. She was furious, alarmed, focused. The next morning, when Chris went outside to walk the dogs, he found muddy footprints around both the front and back doors. Bare footprints. No shoes, no socks. In late November, in Maine. That was the point when even my dad stopped joking. He called the sheriff, and when the deputy came out, he told us they had already gotten a few reports about a strange man in the area over the past couple of days. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody had seen him before. In a town that small, that mattered. My sister and Chris decided to head home that night, but my parents wanted to stay one more evening to tidy up before Christmas. We all tried staying awake late, half to feel in control, and half because nobody really wanted to admit they were scared. Sometime after 3 a.m., I got up for water. I was standing at the kitchen sink when I saw something near the tree line at the edge of the property. A figure, standing still, arms hanging out, head tilted. Exactly the same pose. Then the dog erupted again. My dad came running in, saw me staring out the window, grabbed the gun he kept by the back door for wildlife, and fired into the ground outside to scare whoever it was off. The figure took off into the woods immediately, and for a split second, with the motion and the darkness and the trees shaking behind it, I thought I saw that same horrible, loping run Chris had described. A deputy came later and searched around the property, but of course, he found nothing. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Before we even got home that day, our neighbor called and said the vacation house had caught fire. Someone had broken in through the back door and started a fire in the living room. It turned out to be arson. The fire department got there quickly, so the damage was not catastrophic, but it was enough. The back door glass had been smashed, and the fire had been started in an armchair using lighter fluid and one of those family photo books my mom had made online. That detail got under my skin in a way I cannot fully explain. Not just breaking in, not just setting a fire, using a book of our family pictures. My dad fixed everything quickly because my mom was absolutely determined that Christmas would still happen there. And somehow, unbelievably, it did. When Christmas came, the whole family was there. My parents, me, my sister and Chris, my aunt and uncle, their kids, my grandparents, the whole festive circus. My parents had not told everybody everything. They had downplayed the fire, downplayed the break-in, downplayed all of it, because my mom did not want the holiday ruined. That worked for maybe one day. On Christmas Eve, we were all sitting in the living room when something slammed against the back sliding glass door. My dad went to look and called out, sounding confused, "It's a bird, I think." Then he added, "It doesn't have a head." That was when my sister snapped and told everybody about the creepy man. And because I had been drinking and my judgment had packed up and left for the evening, I blurted out the rest. The footsteps, the figure in the yard, the gunshot, the arson, all of it. That turned into a huge family fight. My aunt, who is deeply into paranormal stuff, immediately started spiraling into theories. My mom was furious. My sister was furious. My poor dad was outside cleaning up a headless bird while the living room turned into chaos. Later that night, my aunt and uncle, because they are exactly the kind of people who would do this, took cameras outside and started calling into the woods, asking if anything was there. A few minutes later, something answered. It was this loud, guttural, unnatural sound from deep in the trees. I heard it from inside the house. Everybody did. My aunt and uncle came running back in. My dad insisted it was probably a deer or a moose making some weird mating call, but none of us believed that. Not really. The next day, in broad daylight, my aunt, uncle, Chris, and the dogs went into the woods behind the house. About a quarter-mile in, they found a campsite. A rough little shelter made from tarps, old sheets, pallets, and stolen outdoor cushions. Trash everywhere. Bottles, cans, cigarette butts, food wrappers. And outside the shelter, mounted like some kind of joke, was a scarecrow. It had been made from stuffed clothes and leaves. The head was an old ball with a ragged dark wig on it. And the clothes were baggy jeans and a t-shirt. Written across the shirt in marker were the words, "Creepy Guy." They also found a notebook filled with nothing but scribbles. No sentences, no drawings. Just pages and pages of frantic, meaningless marks. After that, my sister and Chris left immediately. They had reached their limit. Honestly, I do not blame them. That same night, after dinner, we heard a heavy thud on the roof, then something rolling and falling off the side of the house. And right then, in the middle of all of that fear and adrenaline and tension, my dad had a heart attack. He survived. He recovered. But the whole thing felt cursed by that point, like the house had become a magnet for dread. The next morning, after we got back from the hospital, my uncle walked around outside to see what had landed on the roof. He found a squirrel in the bushes. No head. We did not tell my mom. Since then, we have barely gone back. The cameras are still there, and they still send alerts. Most of the time, it is just animals. Sometimes there is nothing visible at all, just motion detected and empty frames. My aunt and uncle lost all their footage from the trip after their luggage was damaged, which somehow feels fitting, like that whole stretch of time does not want to be pinned down or replayed cleanly. And that is the part that stays with me. Not even just the man himself, though I still see him clearly in my head sometimes. It is the feeling of him, the sense that he had chosen us somehow, or attached himself to the house, or been watching long before we realized we were being watched. I still do not know who he was. I do not know how he kept appearing miles away with no car. I do not know why he stood like that, or why he kept circling back, or whether he was just one very disturbed person or something even harder to explain. I just know that in a tiny town where nothing goes unnoticed, a stranger appeared out of nowhere one freezing November, and for one long winter, it felt like something had stepped out of the woods and decided not to leave. I need to tell you about what's been happening to my younger sister, Marissa, because for a long time, we've felt completely lost. We didn't know what to call it, how to deal with it, or how to protect her from whatever seemed to be happening in that room. It really started back in the spring of 2021 when Marissa was 16. At first, it was sleep paralysis. She would wake up unable to move, terrified, and say it felt like something was there with her. Not long after that, we started noticing handprints on one of her bedroom walls. What made it so unsettling was that the wall had been blocked off by furniture, her TV stand, a bookshelf, a desk, even a mirror, so it wasn't the kind of place someone could casually touch. We tried to brush it off in the beginning. We moved everything back, covered the wall again, and told ourselves not to feed into the fear. But then more marks kept showing up. A couple months later, there were fresh stains. By late summer, there were new prints behind the mirror. Then, near the end of that year, more shapes appeared, and some of them looked almost like a face or some kind of figure. Even saying that still makes me uneasy. There was also one moment that really shook all of us. Her desk somehow tipped over toward her while she was standing away from it, nowhere near close enough to have bumped it. It had been pushed against the wall and felt secure. After that, our dogs would not go into her room without trembling. They acted so anxious around that space that it became impossible to ignore. All through that year, the sleep paralysis kept happening, sometimes several times a month. Marissa told me she heard a deep male voice talking to her during those episodes. It would say cruel things, telling her no one could help her, that she couldn't get rid of it, that she was alone. Hearing her describe that was heartbreaking. We were raised Catholic, so I did what I knew to do. I lit prayer candles, hung crosses, prayed over her room, and kept a rosary on her doorknob. I replaced that rosary more than once because it kept snapping. Eventually, I even started smudging the room, just trying anything that might bring her peace. I kept telling her she had to protect her mind too, because whatever this was seemed to feed on fear. By 2022, we were still trying to manage it the best we could. We covered more of the wall with posters, papers, and finally a tapestry. But even through all of that, you could still see some of the stains bleeding through. There were more marks that spring. The sleep paralysis got a little less frequent for a while, maybe every couple of months instead of every few weeks, and we were hopeful that maybe things were easing up. Then early fall came, and everything turned dark again. The paralysis got worse, and Marissa became afraid to sleep at all. She said every time she closed her eyes, that same voice would come back, threatening her, tormenting her, wearing her down. It got so bad that she would rather stay awake for days than risk falling asleep. We even had her sleep in my room, hoping it would stop if she wasn't alone. But it followed her there too. That was when I really threw everything I had at it. I smudged her room for hours, prayed over her, used holy water, and tried to remind her she wasn't helpless. She told me the voice hated the prayers, said they were useless, said I should stop. But at the same time, she told me they gave her relief. So I kept going. I kept telling her not to let it convince her that it was stronger than she was. For nearly a month, it felt like she was under attack almost every night. Then, slowly, something shifted. She started leaning on the good things around her. Our dogs, her friends, the little moments that made her feel safe again. Bit by bit, the episodes stopped, and by late 2022, things had finally gone quiet. But then in the summer of 2023, it started again. The sleep paralysis came back, and so did the marks. A new handprint appeared high up on the wall, above the tapestry, in a place no one had touched. That tapestry had been hanging there since the year before. Nobody had moved it. Nobody had been behind it. When I finally pulled it back and looked underneath, it felt like all the fear from before came rushing back. That's where we are now. We still don't know what this is or why it seems focused only on her. For a long time, I thought maybe she was vulnerable because she was younger, because she struggled emotionally at times, because maybe whatever this is sensed that. But honestly, I don't know anymore. I just know I'm scared for her. I saw what this did to her before, and I never want her to reach that point again. More than anything, I want her to feel safe in her own room, in her own mind, and in her own life. I want to tell you about something that has stayed with our family for years. Something I still think about when the world gets quiet. About 7 years ago, my mother-in-law, Marin, died very suddenly at home from a blood clot. It happened out in this very remote area where my in-laws lived, the kind of place with mostly summer cottages and only a handful of people who stayed year-round. Because they were so far out, my father-in-law had to do CPR for what felt like forever, well over half an hour, before volunteer responders got there. It took even longer for the ambulance and paramedics to arrive. The whole thing was traumatic and drawn out in a way that made it even harder to process. What makes this story even stranger is that we didn't hear it until more than 2 years after Marin passed, even though it all started not long after her death. Their home sat on a quiet bay, with houses curved around it almost like a horseshoe. The roads behind the homes were winding and indirect, and the whole area was surrounded by trees. My in-laws were close with their neighbors, and there was a footpath between the two houses. Part of it ran through the woods, but most of it had been cleared so you could walk through wildflowers, brush, and open patches of land. One night, the neighbor, who was an ER doctor, woke up in the middle of the night and saw someone on that path. He said it was Marin. But she wasn't dressed the way she normally would have been. She was wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to the early 1900s, and she seemed upset, almost frantic, like she was trying to get somewhere and couldn't figure out how. He watched her moving back and forth along the path, looking lost and deeply confused. And the odd thing is, that detail actually made sense to us. When Marin died, she had been finishing edits on a book she was writing, a biography about someone from the early 20th century. She had been completely immersed in that world. It had taken over so much of her attention and energy that seeing her dressed that way somehow fit. This neighbor wasn't the kind of person who went around telling ghost stories. He was practical, grounded, the sort of man who worked strange hours and often found himself awake in the middle of the night. But he said he kept seeing her. Not just once, but again and again over the next few months. Always outside, always on that same path, always with that same unsettled, searching energy. Then slowly, the sightings became less frequent, and eventually, they stopped. It took him nearly a year to tell his wife, and even then, only because he didn't really know what to make of it. Later, she encouraged him to tell my father-in-law. When my husband and his sister eventually heard the story, something clicked for both of them. Around the same time the neighbors stopped seeing their mother, they had each had a vivid dream only days apart. In both dreams, Marin came to them clearly and calmly. She let them know she understood that she had died. She told them she was okay, that she loved them, and that everything was going to be all right. I can't prove any of it, of course, but deep down, I believe her death was so sudden that it took time for her soul to understand what had happened. And I think once she did, once she found peace, she stopped wandering that path. So, let me tell you about something that happened when I was working at the state prison. I spent about 20 years there, from the mid-90s into the 2010s, working every shift you can imagine and dealing with just about every inmate population we had. By then, I'd heard every ghost story that floated around those halls 100 times over. Most of them I took with a grain of salt, and for the longest time, I couldn't say I had ever really had an experience of my own. Then one night changed that. It was sometime around 2005. I was a sergeant then, working a 12-hour graveyard shift in the Women's Substance Abuse Treatment Unit. The layout of that building matters, so bear with me for a second. There were 4 separate sections, numbered 1 through 4, and each one had 18 cells with 2 inmates in each. 2 sections were on one side of the building, 2 on the other. Each section had its own locked door, and those opened into a larger common area. Then that common area was separated from the front foyer by another locking sliding door. After that, there was still the front exit. So for an inmate to get all the way out, several secured doors would have to be opened first. That's important. On graveyard shift, it was just me and one other officer. We did count at 10:30 p.m., then every hour from midnight to 6 in the morning. We also had culinary workers we had to wake up for kitchen duty at 4 a.m. Usually, we'd do the 4 count a little early, clear it, and then let those workers head out just before 4:30. That night, I was in the control room with my regular partner. The control room sat right in the middle, between the north and south sides of the building. It was a little before 2 a.m. We were doing what people on a quiet overnight shift tend to do, just passing the time online in the dim glow of the monitors. We kept the control room dark so the inmates couldn't easily see in, but the common areas and sections stayed lit for safety. My 2 a.m. count was coming up, and it was my turn to make rounds. I was getting myself together, stretching a little, looking for my flashlight, the usual routine. And then I happened to glance out the control room window toward the common area on the 1-2 side. And I saw Raina. She was an inmate there. I won't use her last name, but I remember her clearly. She was a big woman, close to 6 feet tall, probably over 300 pounds. Quiet, polite, never caused trouble. Honestly, she was one of those inmates you remembered because she carried herself with a kind of gentleness. She also worked in culinary, so at first, seeing her near the sliding door didn't immediately set off alarms. Then it hit me. First, she was way too early to be going to work. Second, and more importantly, I had not opened a single cell door. The second that registered, my whole body went cold. I actually started toward the control panel to open the slider for her out of instinct, then stopped dead and thought, what the hell? I went back to the window and opened the little metal speaking port so I could ask her why she was out of her room. But when I looked again, she was gone. Just gone. I stood there for a second trying to make sense of it. Then I checked the control panel to make sure all the cell doors were still secured. They were. Every one of them. So now I'm unsettled, but I still have count to do. I head out, and the whole time I'm telling myself there has to be a reasonable explanation. I figured maybe when I got to Raina's cell, I'd find her awake and moving around. Maybe she'd tampered with the door somehow, and I'd be writing her up before sunrise. But that's not what happened. When I got to her cell, she was in bed, asleep on her side with her back to the door. I held my flashlight on her longer than I normally would, just to make sure. She never moved. Never stirred. And when I checked, her cell door was locked tight. Nothing else happened that night. No sounds, no movement, nothing I could point to and say, there, that explains it. But I'll tell you this. I never settled down after that. For the rest of the shift, I had that crawling feeling in the back of my neck, like I wasn't alone, like something was just behind me every time I turned a corner. And even now, when I think back on it, the part that stays with me is simple. If Raina was asleep in her locked cell, then who was standing at that door? One of the strangest places I ever lived was this old farmhouse my family rented out in rural Ohio when I was in high school. Even before we moved in, the place felt off. We had to spend days cleaning it up, and the basement was the worst part. It had a dirt floor, and down there we found this rough, homemade kennel that was absolutely filthy, covered in old animal waste. I hated going into that basement. It always gave me this heavy, uneasy feeling I could never really shake. I shared a bedroom with my sister Mara. Our room had this walk-in closet where we kept clothes, board games, sports stuff, all the usual things. On the other side of the room, there was this tiny little door that opened into a crawlspace attic. It was mostly dust, cobwebs, and a forgotten box of little tiles I sometimes used for art projects. My other sister's room, right across the hall, was laid out almost exactly the same way. We even kept a bed pushed in front of that little attic door, half joking and half serious, just to make sure nothing came creeping out of there. But the weirdest thing in our room was the closet door. Every night we'd close it before going to sleep, and every single morning it would be standing open again. We tested it over and over, tried to figure out if it was uneven or loose or if there was some trick to it, but nothing explained it. At one point, we actually took the doorknob apart so we could shut the door and remove the knob completely, thinking that would finally keep it closed. It didn't. Somehow, the door still kept opening. At night, we'd hear scratching in the walls. Now, it was an old farmhouse, so sure, maybe there were mice or something in there. That would have made the most sense. But when you're lying awake in the dark, hearing those sounds move through the walls, your mind doesn't exactly choose the comforting explanation. And it wasn't just the bedroom. Strange things kept happening all through that house. Sometimes the doorbell would ring for no reason. We lived way out in the country, with the nearest neighbor about a mile away, so it wasn't like kids were running by playing pranks. Then there was the day my whole family drove into town, and when we came back that evening, the front screen door was latched from the inside. The back door was secured too, and that one could only be locked by wedging a broomstick under the knob from inside the house. There was no way to do either of those things from outside. So there we were, standing there, realizing both doors were locked in a way that should have been impossible. We ended up forcing a window open to get inside, and when we did, our dogs were hiding under the furniture, completely terrified. Then we noticed every furnace vent in the house had been pulled up from the floor and flipped upside down. Every single one. I also saw things I still can't explain. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see these little glowing orbs drifting around the room. And one evening, out behind the house, I saw two red lights moving slowly across the field. Not headlights, not flashlights, just red orbs gliding through the dark. What makes it even stranger is that my parents didn't really talk about any of their experiences until after we moved out. But later, my mom admitted that while she was home alone during the day, she'd hear odd sounds all the time and notice things being moved. She never actually saw anything happen right in front of her, but she'd put something away, leave the room, and come back to find it sitting out again like it had never been touched. That house was, without question, the creepiest place I've ever lived. I think if I were there now, I probably wouldn't be quite as scared as I was back then. Looking back, as unsettling as it all was, I never really felt anything truly hateful there. Just watched. And that was more than enough. I did not get much time with my mom when I was growing up. My dad was the steady one, the one who raised me day to day, and my mom let him take the lead. I still saw her sometimes, just not often, maybe once every few years. Back then, I did not really understand it. Now that I am older, I do. Life can get tangled fast. People mean well, and still, things slip through their hands. So this happened during one of those visits with her. I was about 9, and we were up on the California coast, near this quiet stretch of beach. Earlier that day, we had stopped at a little roadside fruit stand and bought Rainier cherries, peaches, and a few other things. Her old SUV was parked nearby, and the plan was to spend the evening by the ocean and sleep there. We spent the whole day talking, snacking, and just being together. It felt easy. As the sun started going down, she pulled out a couple of flashlights and 2 plastic buckets. She had missed a lot of my firsts growing up, and I think she was always trying, in her own way, to squeeze in something memorable whenever she had the chance. That night, the adventure was hunting for big shells while the tide pulled back. At first, it felt fun and harmless. The air was damp, that salty kind of cold that sticks to your skin, and we kept getting excited every time our flashlights caught something pale in the sand. Most of it turned out to be little shells, broken bits, drift trash, nothing special. We kept going, further apart after a while, each of us scanning the shoreline. Eventually, I got frustrated. I had not found anything good, and I was tired of stopping for every tiny white speck. So I started sweeping my flashlight farther ahead, looking only for something big. Then I saw it. It was this larger, pale shape near the edge of the beach, half buried. I got so excited I started yelling for my mom and ran toward it, my bucket banging against my leg the whole way. I was sure I had finally found the shell. But when I got close, I noticed there was a big opening in it. At first, I thought it was just cracked or damaged, which honestly did not even bother me. It still seemed like an amazing find. Only then I looked harder, and the opening did not look broken. It looked clean, intentional, like it was supposed to be there. A second later, my mom came up beside me with her flashlight, and we were both just standing there, staring at this strange oval thing in the sand. She gave this short laugh and said, "It's probably just some damn paper plate," like she was trying to brush it off. Then she stepped on it, and that is when everything changed. Instead of collapsing flat, it held firm. It pushed deeper into the sand. The way it moved made my stomach drop. Her foot disturbed the sand around it, and suddenly more of the shape showed itself. What I had thought was a hole looked a lot more like an eye socket. Wide, deep, too defined. And then, as the sand shifted, I saw 2 narrow slits off to one side. It all happened in seconds. My mom grabbed my hand hard and pulled me away from it, fast, back toward the dry part of the beach. I still remember the way she moved. No hesitation, just fear. Real fear. She tried to tell a nearby group what we had seen, but they were drunk or high or both, and nobody took it seriously. They kind of laughed it off. So we packed up all our stuff, left the beach, and got a motel room for the night instead. What stayed with me was this. I knew what bones looked like, even as a kid. The texture, the little pits, the way they catch light. And when she stepped on that thing, it did not bend like trash. It stayed solid. It buried itself. Then it showed that deep socket and those slits. I was convinced it was a skull of some kind. Maybe it belonged to some sea creature. Maybe there is an ordinary explanation for it. I cannot rule that out. But the part I still cannot shake is my mother's reaction. She was a grown woman, and whatever she saw scared her enough to leave immediately. And when the adult in the moment is more frightened than the child, you remember that. You carry it with you. Even now, I still think about that pale shape in the sand and wonder, what exactly we found that night. I've had this experience stuck in my mind for years, and even now, I still can't explain it. Back when I was a teenager, I was involved in a play at a small community theater in my town. I'm not someone who jumps to paranormal conclusions. I've always been pretty skeptical of anything supernatural, and I still am. But this happened, and I've never been able to make sense of it. It was during one of our early rehearsals. We were doing a script read, sitting in a loose circle in the room, maybe a dozen of us all together. Most of us were teenagers, with a few adults there too, including the director. The theater itself had this local reputation for being haunted, which everyone seemed to know about, but I never took that seriously. While we were reading, I happened to glance up, and that's when I saw them. There were these strange silver spheres hanging in the air near the ceiling. I'd say there were around 10 of them, maybe a few more. They were arranged in a rough ring above us, almost echoing the circle we were sitting in below. They weren't bright or glowing exactly, just this muted metallic silver, like old holiday ornaments that had lost some of their shine. Each one looked maybe 2 or 3 inches wide. They were suspended somewhere below the ceiling, not all at the exact same height, and they were drifting downward very slowly. Barely moving, really. Just enough that I could tell they were descending. I remember blurting out something like, "What is that?" and pointing up at them. I expected at least one other person to react, but nobody did. Nobody seemed to see anything. I tried explaining what I was looking at, and everyone just looked confused. As they kept floating lower, I got up to look more closely at one of them. The nearest one had dropped to about eye level. I brought my hand close to it, not touching it, just seeing what would happen. But there was nothing. No warmth, no change in the air, no reflection from my hand on its surface. And it didn't respond to me at all. It just kept drifting downward at the same slow pace. Then I moved around it a little, trying to understand what I was seeing. That's one of the parts that still unsettles me the most. It really seemed to occupy actual space in the room. It wasn't like a floater in your vision, or a trick of the light that shifts when you move your eyes. As I changed position, it stayed where it was, fixed in space except for that gradual descent. It felt real in a physical sense, even though I couldn't interact with it. And all the while, I kept asking the others, "You seriously can't see this?" I was pointing right at it, just inches from my hand, and every single person acted like there was nothing there. Then, after maybe a minute, the spheres started disappearing. Not all at once, one by one. Each of them just sort of crackled away or fizzled out until there was nothing left. I told the group they were gone, sat back down, and tried to act normal. But honestly, I felt embarrassed and shaken. I still don't know what I saw that day. I've tried to explain it in every ordinary way I can, and nothing quite fits. That's what stays with me. Not that it felt supernatural, but that it felt real, and I was the only one who could see it. You know, back in early 2002, my wife, our 4 kids and I moved into this house that had been built sometime in the early 70s. It felt like a dream for us then. 4 bedrooms, a big fenced backyard, plenty of room for the kids to run wild. It really seemed like the perfect family place. For the first few years though, my wife and daughters kept mentioning little things that didn't make much sense. Cabinet doors would be hanging open when nobody remembered touching them. Things would turn up in strange spots. I remember one time the decorative bowl from the dining table somehow ended up in the basement bathroom. Another time, my wife's paperback, the one she always kept on her nightstand, turned up in a basket of clean towels. I kept brushing it off. I figured it had to be the kids fooling around, or somebody moving something absent-mindedly and forgetting about it later. Then it started getting harder to explain. My youngest daughter began talking about this little man she said lived under the stairs. She described him as grouchy, sometimes angry. One day, she told us she'd seen him shouting at a tall, dark shape floating in the hallway outside the girls' room. I remember hearing that and thinking, kids dream up all kinds of things. That had to be all it was. But then one night, I heard my wife yell from the garage. She'd been out there folding laundry, and when I got to her, she looked completely shaken. Pale, unnerved, the whole bit. She told me she'd turned around and almost walked right into this dark figure standing behind her. She said it seemed human-shaped, just black and shadowy, and when she spun around, it slipped backward into the darkness. I stayed out there and finished the laundry for her, but I didn't see a thing. After that, more strange stuff kept happening, and still, somehow, never to me. At that point, I figured maybe I should stop dismissing everybody. My wife wanted to sage the house, so we did. And honestly, things got quiet for about a week. Then one evening, I was home alone. My wife and the kids were out, and I walked into the kitchen to grab a soda from the fridge. I shut the door, turned around, and there it was. A tall, black, human-shaped figure standing maybe 10 feet away from me. I actually rubbed my eyes because I thought, no, this can't be real. But it was still there, slowly moving across the room. And for whatever reason, instead of being scared, I got mad. I just said, out loud, to the empty kitchen, "Fantastic, so we've got a ghost. Now I'm gonna have to burn this house down and salt the whole earth just to be safe." I reached for a glass, looked away for maybe a second, and when I turned back, it was gone. Just like that. And here's the strangest part. We lived in that house another 5 years after that, and nobody in the family ever saw it again. So now, whenever somebody tells me they think they've got a ghost, I always tell them the same thing. Forget sage, just loudly threaten to burn the place down and salt the earth. Worked for me. So, I've been living in this house for a little over a year now, with my dad and my grandmother. It's an old place, easily close to 2 centuries old, maybe more. It has 2 main floors, plus a basement, and this huge attic that feels like its own world. My room is still set up on the 2nd floor for now, but it's tiny, so the plan is to move me up into the attic once it's finished. The attic is the part that really gets to me. There's this old section up there, almost like a hidden room that stretches around part of the attic. Not all the way around, but far enough that it feels bigger than it should. Since we're renting, the landlord, this elderly man named Mr. Halden, left a lot of his old belongings back there. Stuff like faded portraits in heavy gold frames, an antique cradle that looks straight out of a nightmare, and this rusted old furnace sitting in the corner. It's the kind of room that makes you uneasy the second you step into it. And the strangest part is, that room is always warm. Even in the middle of winter, when the rest of the attic feels cold and still, that back room stays oddly heated. It doesn't make sense. What really unsettles me, though, is what happens late at night. The attic barely gets any airflow. When the door is shut, there's practically none. Even with it open, it's not much. The windows are painted or glued shut. There are no fans, no vents doing anything useful. Just this weak little draft from somewhere you can't really trace. And still, sometimes in the early hours of the morning, it sounds like something is scratching from inside that attic room. Not outside the door, inside. Sometimes the door even seems to move slightly with it. I've tried to explain it away. The hinges in this house are old and unreliable. We do have cats, but they never go in there. They won't even linger near the attic for long. Anytime they get close, they back off like they want nothing to do with it. Then there was the closet. I was walking toward my bedroom one day, and across from it there's this storage room nobody really uses. On my right, there's a small closet against the wall. Out of nowhere, the door slowly started to open on its own. I mean slowly, with that long, creaking squeak that old wood makes when it shifts. That room has no breeze, no open window, nothing that should have moved it. The closet itself is tiny, just a few hanging clothes and some old bags inside. I remember staring at it for a second and then deciding, honestly, that I just didn't want to know. And then there are the doors. One afternoon, my friend came over while I was home alone. We were waiting for my mom to pick us up so we could head to the pool before the rest of my family got back. Everything felt normal. My bedroom door was wide open, my grandmother's door was cracked like it usually was, and my dad's room was open too. We were just gathering our things, getting ready to leave, when my grandmother's door suddenly slammed shut. Not drifted, not crept, slammed. My friend saw it happen before I even turned around. When I looked back, the door was fully closed. And just to be clear, those doors are heavy. They're tall, solid hardwood, thick enough that you really have to push them to get them moving. There's no way a little draft could have shut it like that, especially not in a house with such poor airflow. And we were completely alone. Another night, I was lying on my bed when my own door suddenly jerked open a few inches. At the time, I brushed it off. My door has the worst hinges in the house, so I figured maybe it had shifted, or maybe one of the cats had nudged it. But later, I remembered something that still bothers me. We have motion sensor lights by the stairs, and one of them is directly outside my room. It's extremely sensitive. If anything passes near that doorway, even by a foot or so, the light comes on. That time, it stayed dark. No light, no sound from a cat, just the door moving open on its own. And now that I'm thinking about it, those lights have switched on by themselves before too. I know old houses make noise. I know wood settles, hinges slip, and people can scare themselves when they're already uncomfortable in a place. I really do know that. But living here has given me too many moments that feel harder to explain than they should be. It's like the house is always doing something small, just enough to make you question what you saw, or what you heard, or whether you really want to go up into the attic alone again. I want to tell you a little about the house I grew up in, because I think the history of it matters. My family moved in around 2009, not long after my great-grandmother passed away. Before that, we had been living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment, so moving into this place felt like a huge change for all of us. The house had belonged to my dad's side of the family for a long time, especially my great-grandparents, and there was already so much history sitting in those walls before we ever unpacked a single box. And when I say the house is old, I really mean old. During renovations in the kitchen and the upstairs bathroom, we found an ancient cast iron pipe hidden inside one of the walls. A lot of the wiring is outdated too, the kind that makes you wonder how everything is still running without sparks flying. The whole place has always felt like it's carrying the weight of 100 years. The first strange thing I remember happened when I was a kid, probably 8 or 9. It was a school night, and I was lying in bed, right on the edge of falling asleep. My closet door was open, and out of nowhere, I heard a little girl's voice say, very clearly, "Hello." Not faintly, not like I imagined it. I mean clear, like someone was standing right there in my room. I froze. Then I panicked. The only woman in the house that night was my mom, and I didn't have a sister or anyone else who could explain it. I ran downstairs and told my parents, but they brushed it off and said I was probably half asleep, letting my imagination run wild. But I knew what I heard. I still know. After that, I made a habit of sleeping with the closet door shut. The second experience happened a few years later, late at night while everyone was winding down for bed. I was talking with my mom in her room when I noticed a tiny glass keepsake sitting on her dresser. It had a cork in the top, and inside was a folded newspaper clipping with a layer of ash-like dust. When I asked about it, she told me it held a small portion of her grandmother's ashes. Some of the family had each been given a little amount to keep. We talked about it for a while, and then I went to my room. Maybe 15 minutes later, just as I was settling in, I heard a soft knock at my bedroom door. It was light, but distinct enough that I got up and opened it. No one was there. I stood in the doorway for a second, staring into the hall, trying to make sense of it. Nothing moved. No one called out. It was just quiet. The third thing isn't really one moment. It's more like a feeling that never leaves. Anytime I'm alone in the basement, especially in the laundry room, I feel watched. It doesn't matter whether I'm switching clothes from the washer to the dryer or just grabbing something off a shelf. The feeling always creeps in the same way, like there's someone behind me, standing just outside my line of sight. I always turn around, and there's never anybody there. Still, the feeling is so strong that I can't ignore it. These days, whenever I go down there by myself, I play music or a video on my phone just to fill the silence. It helps a little. Not completely, but enough. The last experience happened pretty recently, only a couple of months ago, and honestly, it shook me more than anything else. It was the middle of the night, and I was in bed trying to fall asleep. My room was dark, and I'd had my eyes closed for a while. At one point, I opened them to check the time on my clock. I looked over, saw the time, and then rolled back onto my back. As I settled in, I glanced slightly to my right, and there was something standing beside my bed. It was dark, darker than the room itself, like a human-shaped shadow. I could make out the outline well enough to tell it was roughly my height, maybe even a little shorter. There were no features I could clearly see, no face, no eyes, nothing like that. Just the shape of a person standing there next to me. I didn't hesitate. I jumped out of bed and ran straight into the hall. My parents heard me and came out to see what was wrong. I told them what I'd seen, and I remember trying so hard to make them understand that I wasn't confused and I wasn't dreaming. I knew I had seen someone, or something, standing over me. I haven't seen that figure again since that night. But even now, living in that house still feels different sometimes. Not every day, not every hour. Just in those quiet moments when the place seems to remember something I don't. And when that happens, I can't help feeling like maybe we've never really been alone there at all. I'm going to tell you this the way I remember it, starting with the encounter that still sits the heaviest in my chest and moving forward from there. The main presence in all of this is what I can only describe as an angel-like figure. I've had other strange experiences too, but this one has followed me through so many years that it's the one I keep coming back to. After a few encounters, I started calling her Lucia. Just a small shift from the old name that felt closer to who she was to me. The first time I saw Lucia, I was 4 years old. I had gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. The hallway outside my room was always lit because I was terrified of the dark, so I should have felt safe. But when I came out, I had this sudden, crushing feeling that something was watching me. You know that feeling when your body notices danger before your mind can explain it? It was like that. I looked toward the staircase, and there she was at the bottom. She was tall, far too tall for the house, with huge wings folded behind her, and something long in her hands that looked almost like a blade. Her whole form seemed drained of color, like she had been made from ash, shadow, and winter air. The only sound was this deep, rushing breath, like wind moving across an open field. She didn't really walk. She seemed to glide upward, slow and steady, and her eyes were darker than the rest of her, like empty spaces cut into a pale shape. I panicked. I ran to my mother's room, pounding on the door, crying, begging her to let me in because there was someone in the house. For years, I tried to tell myself it was just the kind of fear a little kid invents in the dark. But later, when I asked my mother about it, she remembered that night. She remembered me saying there was a tall figure in the house and how shaken I was. That memory stayed with her too. From about 6 to 8 years old, Lucia started appearing again, but in a different way. By then, I had been taken into another family, and that home was not a kind place. It was full of anger, fear, and the kind of tension that makes a child feel older than they are. During those years, she would stand in the corner of my room at night. Always the same corner, always silent. This time, though, she didn't scare me the way she had the first night. I could move. I could turn over in bed. I could pull the blanket tighter and pretend not to notice her, even though I always did. Around her there was this faint mist, bluish and greenish, like smoke catching moonlight. She would just stand there, watching. Not threatening, not comforting either exactly, just present. Someone I cared about later suggested maybe she had been some kind of guardian presence, maybe trying to absorb the ugliness around me or keep watch when no one else did. I still don't know what I believe. I only know that in the middle of all that pain, she kept showing up. When I was 14, I was living somewhere safer. That summer I was at camp, and during a quiet period when everyone was supposed to stay in their cabins, I snuck out because I was the kind of kid who always needed to be outside. I was walking through the woods near the ropes course when I noticed movement beside me in the trees. It was Lucia. She was gliding between the trunks, keeping pace with me. It was daytime, so for the first time I could really see her. Her wings looked dark at first, but underneath there was this deep blue sheen, like crow feathers catching light. Her face looked strangely young, younger than something ancient ought to look. The cloak around her was still dark and colorless, and that thin, drifting haze still hung around her. I tried to get closer. I don't know whether that was courage or teenage foolishness, maybe both. But every time I stepped toward her, she moved back by the same amount, as if there was a distance she could never let me cross. Eventually, I gave up and turned back toward camp. She stayed beside me for a while, moving through the trees, and then she was simply gone before I reached the clearing. At 15, I saw her again while I was on a beach in Maine. It was late in the day, and I remember feeling unusually calm, almost peaceful, just standing there looking out at the water. When I turned, she was near a lamppost farther back from the shore, watching me. I started toward her, just a few steps, but she vanished almost immediately, like she had only meant to be seen and not approached. The next big encounter came when I was 18. By then, I had been struggling hard. I'd been using drugs for years and had already come too close to death more than once. I had just gotten out of treatment and was staying in a sober home. One night, I went out walking along a wooded bike path. There was a bridge there, and that's where she appeared again. I didn't want to deal with it. I turned around and headed back. But later, while I was on the phone with a friend, I saw her again outside the window. I remember freezing, then asking the friend if they could see anything. They said yes. They saw a figure and asked me what it was. I told them the truth, that I had seen her for years and still had no explanation. That ended up being one of the last conversations I ever had with that friend. We drifted apart after that. I can't tell you why that detail matters to me, only that it does. And now we get to what's happening lately. the reason I'm telling you any of this at all. For the past week, sleep has barely touched me. Every time I start to drift off, I end up in the same place. I'm standing on a frozen surface in total darkness. Beneath the ice is a single eye, impossibly huge, so large it makes everything human feel microscopic. And it is looking straight at me. Not upward, not around, at me, directly at me. That's what unsettles me most. It doesn't feel like an ordinary dream. It feels like being observed. I wake up shaking with cold, with that awful sensation still clinging to me, like something crossed the line between sleep and waking and followed me back. And now Lucia is near again too. Not always fully visible, not for long, but enough that I know she's there. So that's where I am. I've told you as honestly as I can, and I've even altered a few small details in the telling, because memory is a living thing, and sometimes shifts when you hold it up to the light. But the heart of it is true. This presence has followed me from childhood into adulthood, through fear, abuse, recovery, and now sleepless nights. I don't know what Lucia is. I don't know whether she wants something from me, whether she has been protecting me, warning me, or simply watching. I only know I'm tired, and I want one ordinary night of sleep. So last night, my friend and I tried something I still can't fully explain. He was on TikTok live with me, all the way in Portland, while I was in New York City. He had the Ouija board in front of him, and I had the EMF reader with me. We started carefully, opening the board only to neutral or kind spirits, just to be safe. The first spirit that came through gave us a name when we asked. It spelled out T. Gursanov. When we asked where he was from, it spelled something like risky, which made us think maybe Soviet or Russian. We searched for anything that matched, but found nothing. He did not seem to have much more to say, but while he was there, the EMF reader kept reacting. After a while, we said goodbye and opened the board again for any other spirit that wanted to speak. That is when everything changed. The EMF reader suddenly went wild, straight into the red, blinking over and over without stopping. We asked for a name, and the board kept moving between the same letters, spelling out Vova again and again. At first, we honestly thought it might just be a child spirit, almost playful, not really understanding what we were asking. We looked up the word afterward and only found a strange little coincidence, but nothing that really explained it. So we asked how old the spirit was. The planchette moved to 5. We asked again just to make sure, and it stayed there. That was the moment we realized we might really be talking to a child. Then I asked a question I truly wish I had left alone. The answer that came through was water. The second that word was spelled out, the whole atmosphere around me shifted. The EMF reader was going harder than it had the entire night, and the air around me turned freezing cold. I got chills instantly, and the back of my hand started prickling. I reached my hand out over the EMF reader, and I swear I felt something cold and damp against it, almost like a wet face. At the exact same time, my friend, miles away, said he was feeling chills too. That was enough for both of us. We ended the session right there, said goodbye, and put the board away. By then, I was starting to feel physically sick, nauseous, shaky, and completely drained. Whatever we had connected with, it felt deeply unsettling, and the sense we were left with was that this 5-year-old spirit had drowned. I still don't know what to make of it. I just know neither of us felt normal after that.